In the middle of the journey of life, the Florentine poet found himself lost in a dark forest where the straight path had been completely abandoned. He could not remember how he had entered this wilderness. So full was he of sleep at that moment when he strayed from the true way. The year was 1300, and the author had reached his 35th birthday, the midpoint of human existence according to the biblical span of 70 and 10. The wood was savage, rough, and dense, and the memory of it renewed his fear. Death itself was little worse than this place of shadows and confusion. How the writer had entered, he could not recall, for his soul had been so filled with spiritual torpor at the moment he abandoned the righteous path. Yet this terrible forest would become the beginning of his salvation, though he did not yet know it. As dawn approached, the lost poet looked up and beheld that the hilltop before his eyes was already clothed with the rays of the sun that leads mortals straight on every path. The sight of that distant light calmed somewhat the lake of fear that had gathered in his heart through the night of anguish he had endured. Like a swimmer who has escaped from the deep sea to the shore and turns back to gaze upon the dangerous waters he has left behind, so his essence, still fleeing, turned to look back at the passage that had never yet let any person pass alive. After resting his weary body briefly, the Florentine resumed his journey up the desert slope, his firm foot always the lower as he climbed. But when he had barely begun his ascent of that deserted hillside, 3 beasts appeared to block his way. The first was a leopard, light and very swift, covered with a spotted coat. This creature would not depart from before his face, but rather hindered his path so much that he turned back many times to retrace his steps. The leopard, beautiful yet menacing, represented the sin of lust that entices with pleasure before destroying. Its spotted hide gleamed in the morning light, and its graceful movements belied the deadly threat it posed to any being seeking the path of righteousness. The beast circled the poet with predatory patience, forcing retreat again and again as he attempted to climb toward salvation. The time was the beginning of morning, and the sun was rising in company with those stars that were with it, when divine affection first set those beautiful things in motion. The hour and the sweet season gave the author reason to hope for good fortune from that beast with the gay skin. Yet this hope was not enough to prevent fear when a lion appeared before the man. This second beast seemed to be coming toward the wanderer, with its head held high and with such raging hunger that even the air seemed to tremble with fear. The lion embodied the sin of pride, that root of all evil which caused Lucifer himself to fall from heaven. Its mane bristled with arrogance, and its roar echoed through the valley with the sound of those who believed themselves above divine law. This beast moved with the confidence of creatures who acknowledge no master, whose appetite for dominance could never be satisfied by earthly conquest. Worse still was the she-wolf that followed, so laden with every craving in her lean appearance that she had already caused many people to live in misery. She brought such heaviness upon the writer's essence with the terror that came from the sight of her that he lost hope of reaching the summit. Like someone who is eager for gain, but when the time comes that makes them lose, weeps and is saddened in all their thoughts, such did the restless beast make the Florentine as she came against the poet, and pushed back little by little to where the sun is silent. This she-wolf was the most terrible of the 3, for she represented avarice and greed, that insatiable hunger for material things that corrupts both individuals and societies. Her ribs showed through her mangy coat, yet no amount of feeding could fill the void within her. She was the beast that had already ruined Italy, and would continue to spread misery until the prophesied deliverer came to drive her back to the underworld. While the lost author was falling back to the lower place, there appeared before his eyes a figure who seemed faint through long silence. "Have pity on me," the man cried to this apparition. "Whatever you are, whether shade or living person. The reply came back, not man, though I was born of Lombard parents, and both were Mantuan by country. I was born under Julius Caesar, though late in his time, and I lived in Rome under the good Augustus, in the time of the false and lying gods. This was the Roman poet, whose voice had not grown hoarse from speaking wisdom to the world. He had written the Aeneid, that epic poem which told of Aeneas's journey from the ruins of Troy to the founding of the Roman Empire. In his verses lived the noblest ideals of classical civilization, and his words had been the Florentines' teacher in the art of poetry. "You are my master and my author," the writer declared with reverence. "You alone are he from whom I took the beautiful style that has brought me honor. See the beast that has made me turn back. Help me against her, famous sage, for she makes my veins and pulse tremble." The ancient poet's response carried both warning and promise. "It is necessary for you to take another path if you wish to escape from this wild place," the Roman explained. "This beast, because of which you cry out, does not let anyone pass along her way, but hinders them so much that she kills them. She has a nature so malicious and evil that she never satisfies her greedy appetite, and after feeding is hungrier than before." The classical master spoke of a future deliverer who would come to save Italy from the corruption that the she-wolf represented. "The greyhound will come," the guide prophesied, "who will make her die a painful death. He will not feed on land or money, but on wisdom, devotion, and virtue. His birth will be between felt and felt, and he will be the salvation of that humble Italy for which the Virgin Camilla died, and Euryalus, Turnus, and Nisus died of their wounds." Having accepted the Roman as his guide, the author prepared to follow on the only path that could lead to salvation, down through the depths of the underworld itself, up the mountain of Purgatory, and finally to the heights of paradise. As they approached the hidden gate that separated the world of the living from the realm of the damned, the Florentine felt the weight of mortality pressing upon his being. The entrance to the abyss appeared before them like a wound in the earth itself, surrounded by dark stones on which words were inscribed in a colour obscure and threatening. "Master," the poet said, "their meaning fills me with dread." The ancient guide, like a person experienced in such matters, replied, "Here you must leave behind all hesitation. Here cowardice must die. We have reached the place I told you we would reach, where you will see the wretched people who have lost the good that intellect can attain." Above the gate, carved in stone darker than night, were the words that would echo through eternity. "Through me is the way to the suffering city. Through me is the way to eternal pain. Through me is the way among the lost. Justice moved my maker. Divine power made me, highest wisdom also, and primal affection. Before me nothing but eternal things were made, and I endure eternally. Abandon all hope, you who enter here." These words of darkest colour the author read, inscribed above a portal, and he said, "Master, their meaning is difficult for me." And the guide replied, as someone experienced, "Here you must leave behind all doubt. Here you must be brave and not retreat. We have come to the place I told you about, where you will see the miserable people who have lost the good that the intellect seeks." After placing his hand on the writers, with a face so cheerful that it comforted the man, the Roman led forward among the secret things. Here sighs, complaints, and deep wailings resounded through the air devoid of stars, so that at first the Florentine wept to hear them. Various languages, horrible pronunciations, words of pain, accents of anger, voices high and hoarse, and sounds made by striking hands created a tumult that whirls always in that eternally dark air, like sand when whirlwinds sweep the land. These were the souls of those who lived without praise or blame, the uncommitted who in life had chosen neither good nor evil, but had lived only for themselves. Mixed with them were those rebellious angels who were neither faithful to God nor rebellious against the divine, but were for themselves. Heaven chased them out to maintain its beauty, and deep damnation does not receive them, for even the condemned would have some glory over them. Master, the poet said, what is it that I hear? And what are these people whom pain has defeated? The guide replied, this miserable condition belongs to the sorry beings who lived without praise or blame. They are mixed here with that cowardly choir of angels who were neither rebellious nor faithful to God, but were for themselves. Heaven expelled them to preserve its beauty, and the depths of the abyss do not receive them, because the condemned would gain some glory from them. Among these figures, the author recognized someone whom he believed to be the shade of a person who made the mighty refusal, perhaps Pope Celestine VIII, who abdicated the papacy and thus opened the way for the corrupt Boniface VIII, the Florentines' bitter enemy. These beings were naked and were stung constantly by wasps and hornets that made their faces stream with blood, which mixed with tears fell to their feet and was consumed by loathsome worms. Beyond this vestibule of the abyss proper lay the river Acheron, where Charon the ferryman transported the damned to their eternal punishments. This ancient boatman, with eyes like glowing coals, beckoned to the condemned to enter his vessel. Woe to you, wicked beings, Charon cried. Do not hope ever to see the sky again. I come to lead you to the other shore, into eternal darkness, into fire and ice, and you there, living person, depart from these who are dead. But when the ferryman noticed that the poet did not move, Charon continued, by another way, by other ports, you will come to shore, not here for passage. A lighter vessel must carry you. The Roman guide rebuked the boatman. Charon, do not rage. This is willed where all that is willed can be done, and ask no more. Then the woolly cheeks of the ferryman of the livid marsh fell quiet, he who had wheels of flame around his eyes. A mighty earthquake shook the land, accompanied by a crimson light, and the author fell unconscious. When he awoke, the Florentine found himself on the other side of Acheron, at the edge of the abyss of pain. From the depths arose the sound of infinite woe. Dark and deep and misty was the valley, so that though the man gazed intently into its depths, nothing could be made out clearly. Now let us descend into the blind world, the ancient poet began, his face deadly pale. I will go first, and you will follow. The writer, seeing his guide's pallor, said, how can I come if you, who are my comfort in doubt and my help against fear, are afraid? The Roman replied, the anguish of the people below paints my face with the pity that you mistake for fear. Let us go, for the long road urges us on. They came to the edge of the first circle that girds the abyss. Here there was no torment except sighs that made the eternal air tremble. This came from the sadness, without torment, of crowds that were many and numerous, of infants and of women and men. The guide said to the author, you do not ask what beings these are that you see. Before you go further, I want you to know that they did not sin. And though they have merit, that is not enough, because they did not have baptism, which is part of the faith that you believe. And if they lived before Christianity, they did not worship God properly, and among such as these am I myself. This was limbo, the first circle of the underworld, where dwelt the souls of the virtuous unbaptized. Here was neither punishment nor reward. but only the pain of desire without hope. The inhabitants lived in a castle of noble architecture, surrounded by 7 walls and defended by a little stream. Here the poet met the greatest figures of classical antiquity: Homer, the sovereign bard; Horace, the satirist; Ovid, Lucan, and many others. In the castle's green meadow, the Florentine observed people with slow and grave eyes, of magnificent authority in their appearance. They spoke seldom and with gentle voices. The poets withdrew to a side, to a place open, high, and bright, where all could be seen. There on the green enamel were shown to the writer the noble figures whom he felt honoured to have seen. Here was Electra with many companions, among whom the author recognized Hector and Aeneas, Caesar armed with his falcon eyes, Camilla and Penthesilea on the other side, and King Latinus sitting with his daughter Lavinia. The man beheld Brutus, who drove out Tarquin, Lucretia, Julia, Marcia, and Cornelia, and alone, apart, Saladin. When the poet raised his eyes a little higher, he observed the master of those who know, Aristotle, sitting among a philosophical family. All look at the philosopher and honour the wise man. Here the Florentine observed Socrates and Plato, who stand closer to Aristotle than the others; Democritus, who ascribes the world to chance; Diogenes, Anaxagoras, and Thales; Empedocles, Heraclitus, and Zeno, and the good collector of qualities, Dioscorides, and Orpheus, Tully, and Linus, and moral Seneca, Euclid the geometer, and Ptolemy, Hippocrates, Avicenna, and Galen, and Averroes, who made the magnificent commentary. From this noble castle, the Roman guide led the author onward to the second circle of the abyss, where true punishment would begin. As they descended, they encountered Minos, the judge of the underworld. This creature, king of Crete in life, had been transformed in death into a grotesque hybrid, part man, part serpent, whose duty it was to assign each arriving being to its proper circle of torment. Minos stood at the entrance to the second circle, examining the sins of those who came before the judge. With his serpentine tail, the creature would wind himself around his body a number of times equal to the circle to which each person was to be sent. Always before the judge stood a crowd of sinners, each going to judgment in turn, speaking, hearing, and then being hurled down. "O you who enter this place of woe," Minos said to the living man when he beheld the writer, leaving aside his mighty office, "beware how you enter and in whom you trust. Do not let the breadth of the entrance deceive you." The guide replied, "Why do you cry out? Do not hinder his fated journey. This is willed where all that is willed can be done, and ask no more." Beyond Minos lay the second circle, where the lustful were punished. Here the damned were swept about by a terrible wind that never rests, carrying the condemned with its violence, whirling and striking them. When they come before its rush, there are shrieks, laments, and wailing. There they blaspheme divine power. The author understood that to such torment the carnal sinners are condemned, who subject reason to desire. Like starlings borne by their wings in the cold season, in large full flocks, so that blast carries the evil beings. Here, there, down, up, it leads them. No hope of rest ever comforts them, nor of lesser pain, but of no pain at all. And like cranes that go singing their lays, making a long line of themselves in the air, so the Florentine witnessed coming, uttering wails, shades borne by the strife of winds. Among these figures, in torment, the poet recognized many who had died for passion. Here were Semiramis, of whom it is read that she succeeded Ninus and was his wife. She held the land that the Sultan rules. The other is she who killed herself for desire, and broke faith with the ashes of Psycheus, lustful Dido. Next is Cleopatra, Helen for whom so many evil years revolved, and mighty Achilles, who fought to the end with passion. Paris and Tristan the writer observed, and more than 1,000 shades whom desire had severed from our life. But among all these tragic figures of antiquity, two beings caught the author's particular attention, a pair who moved together through the eternal storm, their devotion binding them even in damnation. These were Francesca da Rimini and Paolo Malatesta, whose story would become among the most moving episodes in all of the abyss. O living creature, gracious and kind, the man called to them, who go through the black air visiting us, who stained the world with blood. If the King of the universe were our friend, we would pray to the divine for your peace, since you have pity on our perverse misfortune. Whatever you are pleased to hear and speak of, we will hear and speak with you while the wind, as now, is quiet for us. Francesca's reply carried the music of her native Romagna and the pain of eternal separation from divine grace. O gracious being and kind, who come through the black air to visit us, who stained the earth crimson. If the King of the cosmos were friendly to us, we would beseech the Almighty to grant you peace, since you show pity for our twisted fate. We shall gladly hear and discuss with you whatever you wish to hear and discuss, while the wind stays calm as it is now. She told their story with heartbreaking simplicity. Affection, which quickly seizes the gentle heart, seized this man for the beautiful body that was taken from me, and the way of it still hurts me. Devotion, which does not release any beloved from caring, seized me so strongly for his charm that, as you see, it still does not abandon me. Passion led us to one death. Cana awaits the person who extinguished our life. The tale of their doom was brief, but terrible. Reading together from the romance of Lancelot, they had been overcome by the parallel between their own situation and that of the legendary pair. When we read how the longed-for smile was kissed by such a paramour, this fellow, who will never be separated from me, kissed my mouth all trembling. Galeotto was the book, and he who wrote it. That day, we read no farther in it. While Francesca spoke, Paolo wept so piteously that the poet fainted from compassion, falling as a dead body falls. Their punishment was eternal, to be swept forever through the stormy air, together yet unable to find peace, their devotion transformed from blessing into curse by the sin that accompanied it. Thus ended the writer's introduction to the true torments of the abyss, where he had learned that even the most profound human emotions, when disordered by sin, become sources of eternal anguish. The journey through the remaining circles would reveal progressively worse forms of evil, but none would touch his heart quite as deeply as this first encounter with figures whose sins sprang from affection itself, however misdirected. When consciousness returned to the Florentine poet, he found himself in the third circle of the abyss, where a cold, heavy rain falls eternally, water mixed with hail and dirty snow pouring down through the murky air. The ground beneath receives this foul precipitation and reeks with a putrid stench that assaults the senses. Here dwell the gluttonous, those who in life surrendered reason to their appetites and made their bellies their gods. Cerberus, the cruel and monstrous beast with 3 throats, guards this realm of perpetual hunger. This hellish creature barks with canine fury, his eyes red as blood, his beard black and greasy, his belly enormous and his hands clawed. The demon tears apart the wretched souls, flays them, and quarters them with the savagery of an eternal predator. When the rain strikes the damned, they howl like dogs, using one side of their bodies to shield the other in a futile attempt to find protection. The ancient Roman, seeing the ferocious guardian approach, opened his hands and grasped handfuls of earth, hurling the filthy soil into the ravenous mouths of the beast. Like a starving dog that becomes quiet when it seizes food and strives only to devour it, so became the demon's disgusting faces, which thunder at the souls so loudly that they would gladly be deaf. Among the spirits lying in this foul slush, the poet encountered one who raised himself up when he saw the living man pass. "O you who are led through this infernal realm," the shade called out, "recognize me if you can. You were made before I was unmade." The Florentine replied that the anguish distorting the figure's features prevented recognition, but asked the being to identify himself. "I am Chiaco," came the reply, using the nickname that meant hog, a fitting name for one condemned to this circle of gluttony. This wretched soul had been a citizen of the beautiful city that the writer called home, and their conversation turned to the political strife that would tear Florence apart. Chiaco prophesied the coming conflicts between the white and black Guelph factions, predicting exile and suffering for many, including the living man himself. The gluttons spoke of the corruption that had infected their beloved city. Pride, envy, and avarice are the three sparks that have set all hearts aflame. When asked about the fate of certain righteous citizens, Chiaco revealed that they were relegated to the blackest depths of the underworld, weighed down by other sins. "When you return to the sweet world," the damned soul pleaded, "bring me to memory in the minds of people." With these words, Chiaco sank back into the filthy mire, joining his fellow sufferers in their eternal wallowing. Descending deeper, the two poets reached the fourth circle, where they encountered a sight that amazed and horrified them. Here was assembled the largest crowd of souls they had yet witnessed, all engaged in a futile, eternal labor. These were the avaricious and the prodigal, those who had loved money too much, and those who had squandered it too freely. Their punishment was to push enormous weights with their chests, circling the semicircle of their domain until they met their opposites head-on. When the two groups collided, each turned around and rolled their burdens back, shouting at their enemies across the divide. The misers cried out, "Why do you hoard?" While the spendthrifts responded, "Why do you squander?" Thus they returned along the grim circle to the opposite point, always hurling their mutual reproaches. When each group reached their starting point, they turned and ran their course again, locked forever in this dance of opposing but equally damning sins. Among the hoarders, the living visitor recognized many tonsured heads, clerics, popes, and cardinals, in whom avarice had taken complete control. These religious figures, who should have been shepherds of souls, had instead become slaves to material wealth, their spiritual authority corrupted by earthly greed. The Roman teacher explained that these souls had lived without measure, neither giving nor keeping in moderation, and therefore their eternal punishment reflected the same lack of balance that had characterized their earthly existence. From this circle, they descended to the fifth level, where the river Styx winds its way around the city of Dis. In these murky waters, the wrathful engage in eternal combat, striking each other not only with their hands, but with their heads, chests, feet, and teeth, tearing each other piece by piece. Beneath the surface of the dark marsh, another group suffers, the sullen, whose bubbles rise to the surface as they try to speak their lament. Sullen were we in the sweet air that is gladdened by the sun, carrying within ourselves the lazy smoke of anger. Now we are sullen in the black mire. As they approached the waters, a small boat came swiftly toward them. steered by an ancient ferryman who cried, "Woe to you, wicked soul! Do not hope ever to see heaven. I come to carry you to the other shore, into eternal darkness, into fire and ice." But when he saw that the Florentine did not depart, the boatman's tone changed. "By another way, by other ports you will reach the shore, not here. A lighter craft must carry you." Virgil rebuked this boatman as he had Charon. "Phlegyas, do not rage this time. This journey is willed, where all that is willed can be accomplished." Then the proud spirit fell silent. During their crossing, a soul covered in mud approached their vessel. It was Filippo Argenti, a noble known for his violent temper and his enmity toward the poet's political faction. "Who are you that come before your time?" Argenti demanded. The writer replied, "If I come, I do not remain." "But who are you, so befouled?" The spirit answered, "You see that I am one who weeps." Then the Florentine, filled with righteous anger, declared, "In weeping and in sorrow may you remain, accursed spirit, for I recognize you despite the filth that covers you." The shade tried to seize the boat with both hands, but the wise Roman pushed him away, saying, "Away with the other dogs." Then he embraced his charge and kissed his face, praising him for his just indignation against the sinner. As they crossed the Styx, the city of Dis appeared before them, with its red-hot iron towers glowing like flames in the darkness. This was the entrance to lower hell, where the more serious sins were punished. The walls seemed made of iron, and from the battlements, thousands of fallen angels looked down upon the approaching voyagers. These rebellious spirits, who had joined Lucifer in his prideful revolt against heaven, now served as guardians of the deepest regions of damnation. When the demons saw the living man, they cried out in fury, "Who is this one who, without death, travels through the realm of the dead?" The ancient master made a sign that he wished to speak with them in secret, and their great anger subsided somewhat. "You stay here," they said to the Roman poet, "and let him go who has entered so boldly into this kingdom. Let him return alone by his mad way if he can, for you who have led him through such dark territory shall remain here." Terror filled the writer's heart at these words. "Oh, my dear teacher," he pleaded, "you who have delivered me from danger more than 7 times and stood by me in the face of every peril, do not abandon me in my undoing. If we cannot pass beyond this point, let us quickly retrace our steps together." But the elder, seeing his companion's fear, painted his face with a reassuring expression, despite his own inner turmoil. The Roman attempted to negotiate with the demons, but they slammed the gates of Dis in his face with tremendous force, leaving him standing outside while they returned to their internal councils. This was the first time in the entire journey that the ancient poet's authority had been challenged and rejected, and the Florentine felt his confidence shake at this unprecedented obstacle. "Do not fear," Virgil assured his charge, "for our passage cannot be prevented by those within. Such opposition is not new. These same demons tried to bar the gates against a greater than we, at that portal which still stands open without a lock. Above it you read the dead inscription, and already, descending the steep slope and passing through the circles without escort, comes one who will open this city for us." True to this prophecy, a celestial messenger appeared, an angel of God whose very presence caused the marshlands to flee before him. With a small wand, he touched the gates of Dis, which sprang open immediately. "O outcasts from heaven," the divine emissary addressed the fallen angels, "why does this insolence lodge in you? Why do you resist that will whose purpose is never thwarted, and which has many times increased your torment? What use is it to butt against destiny? Your Cerberus, if you remember well, still bears his throat and chin stripped of hair for doing so. Having delivered this rebuke, the angel departed as quickly as he had come, speaking no word to the poets. Within the city of Dis lay the sixth circle, where the heretics suffer their eternal punishment. Here, in a vast cemetery, lie thousands of flaming tombs, each one glowing more intensely than the hottest iron in a forge. The lids of these sepulchres stand open, and from within come such terrible laments that clearly the occupants are wretched and tormented. The elder explained that these monuments contain the arch-heretics and their followers, those who believed that the soul dies with the body, denying the immortality that is fundamental to true faith. They had lived as if this earthly existence were all there is, and so in death, they are trapped in burning tombs that symbolize their spiritual deadness. As they walked among these monuments, a voice suddenly called out from one of the tombs, "O Tuscan, you who travel alive through this city of fire, speaking so decorously, be pleased to stop in this place. Your accent reveals that you are a native of that noble fatherland, which perhaps I treated too harshly." This voice startled the living man, who pressed closer to his mentor for protection. The speaker was Farinata degli Uberti, leader of the Ghibellina faction that had been the poet's political enemies. This proud soul had risen from his flaming tomb to the waist, looking around as if he held great scorn for all of hell itself. With bold hands, the Roman pushed his companion toward the monument, saying, "Let your words be precise." That is Farinata, who has raised himself up. You can see him from the waist up. The writer's eyes were already fixed on the heretic's face, and Farinata stood erect, with his chest and forehead thrust forward, as if he held hell in great disdain. Moving among the tombs, the Florentine reached the foot of Farinata's sepulchre, whereupon the proud spirit asked, "Who were your ancestors?" Desiring to obey his mentor, the living visitor concealed nothing, but revealed his lineage completely. Upon hearing the family name, Farinata raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "They were fierce enemies to me, and to my forebears, and to my party, so that twice I scattered them." The poet replied, "If they were driven out, they returned from every quarter both times, but yours have not learned that art well." At this reproach, another shade appeared beside Farinata, visible from the chin up. This was Cavalcante de Cavalcanti, father of the writer's dear friend, Guido. Looking around as if expecting to see someone else, Cavalcante asked, "If you travel through this blind prison by virtue of your lofty genius, where is my son? Why is he not with you?" The living man answered, "I do not come here by my own power. He who waits for me over there leads me through this place, whom perhaps your Guido held in disdain." The word "held" in the past tense made the father believe his son was dead, and with great anguish he fell back into his tomb. Farinata, who had listened to this exchange without changing expression, continued their previous conversation. "If they have poorly learned that art of return from exile, that torments me more than this bed of suffering. But the face of the queen who rules here will not be rekindled 50 times before you too shall learn how difficult that art is." He was prophesying the poet's own coming exile from Florence, which would prove more painful than any physical torment. The heretic also revealed the limited nature of their knowledge in this realm. We see, like those with defective sight, things that are distant from us. When events draw near or are present, our understanding is entirely void, and if others do not bring us word, we know nothing of your human condition. Therefore, you can understand that all our knowledge will be utterly dead from that moment when the portal of the future shall be closed. From the sixth circle, they continued their descent to the seventh, where violence in all its forms receives punishment proportioned to its cruelty. This circle is divided into 3 rings, each dedicated to a different type of violent sin: violence against one's neighbor, violence against oneself, and violence against God. A steep cliff marks the boundary between the 6th and 7th circles, and at its edge sits the Minotaur, that infernal beast of Crete who was conceived through the unnatural passion of Pasiphae. When the monster saw the 2 poets approaching, it bit itself in rage, like one overcome by anger. The wise Roman called out to it, "Perhaps you think this is the Duke of Athens, who in the upper world dealt you your death. Get away, beast, for this one does not come instructed by your sister, but travels to observe your punishments. Like a bull that breaks loose at the moment it receives the mortal blow and cannot walk straight but leaps here and there, so did the Minotaur behave, allowing the poets to descend the rocky slope. At the bottom of the cliff flows the river Phlegethon, boiling with blood, in which are immersed those who through violence have injured others. Centaurs run along the bank, armed with bows and arrows, shooting any soul that emerges from the blood more than his sin permits. 3 of these creatures came toward the poets: Nessus, Chiron, and Pholus, all famous for their roles in classical mythology. Chiron, the wisest of the centaurs and teacher of Achilles, noticed that the Florentines' feet moved the stones they touched, a sign that he was still alive. The master explained their mission and requested safe passage, whereupon Chiron assigned Nessus to escort them across the river, carrying the living man on his back while pointing out the various tyrants and murderers immersed in the boiling blood according to their degrees of guilt. Here, Alexander the Great and Dionysius of Syracuse stood immersed up to their eyes, having shown no mercy to their enemies in life. Nearby were other tyrants and highway robbers, each receiving the exact measure of punishment that corresponded to the violence they had inflicted upon others. The boiling blood that had been shed unjustly on earth now served as their eternal torment. Beyond the river of blood lay the 2nd ring of the 7th circle, where the violent against themselves, the suicides, are transformed into gnarled trees and bushes in a pathless wood. Here dwell the harpies, those foul creatures with human faces, but the bodies and claws of birds, who nest in the strange trees and cause eternal pain to those trapped within the bark. The elder instructed his charge to break a small branch from one of these trees, and when the poet did so, the tree bled and cried out in anguish, "Why do you tear me? Do you have no spirit of piety? We were men, and now we have become trees. Your hand should have been more merciful, even if we had been the souls of serpents." The voice belonged to Pierre Delvigne, who had been chancellor and trusted advisor to Emperor Frederick II, until false accusations of treason led to his imprisonment and suicide. In life, he had been a master of eloquence and statecraft, but despair had driven him to take his own life, and now he was trapped forever in this thornwood. His human form lost, but his capacity for suffering increased. If he had been able to believe before, Pierre Delvigne said, referring to the living visitor, what he has seen only in my verse, he would not have stretched out his hand against me. But because the thing is so incredible, make me do that which will shame me, and I care not. The Roman urged him to speak further, promising that his words would restore his memory among the living. The trapped soul explained his fate. I am he who held both keys to Frederick's heart, locking and unlocking with such skill that from his secrets I excluded almost everyone. I bore faith to the glorious office so completely that I lost sleep and life. The courtesan who never turned her whorish eyes from Caesar's household, the common death and vice of courts, inflamed all minds against me. And they so inflamed Augustus, that my glad honours turned to dismal sorrows. The Spirit revealed the eternal law governing the suicides. When the final judgment comes and all souls retrieve their bodies, these violent souls will not be reunited with their flesh. Instead, their bodies will hang from the very trees that imprison their spirits. For it would not be just for anyone to possess what they had violently thrown away. As they prepared to leave this mournful wood, they heard sounds of pursuit and destruction approaching. Soon 2 naked souls appeared, running so fast they broke every branch in their path. The leader cried, "Now come, death, now come," while the follower, unable to keep pace, shouted, "Lano, your legs were not so swift at the jousts of Topo." This was a reference to a battle where the first runner, Lano da Siena, had sought death in combat but failed to find it. These were the souls of the violent against their own possessions, the squanderers who had deliberately destroyed their wealth through reckless spending and gambling. Their punishment was to be eternally pursued and torn apart by black female hounds, representing the destructive consequences of their wasteful behavior in life. As the poets continued their descent toward the final ring of the 7th circle, they saw the true depth and breadth of hell's architecture. Each circle was larger than the last, and each punishment more precisely calibrated to the nature of the sin being corrected. The journey through these realms of violence had shown them that even righteous anger and justified vengeance, when carried to extremes, could become sources of eternal damnation. The landscape itself seemed to reflect the moral disorder of violence. The boiling blood, the thornwood where human nature was perverted into plant form, the pursuing beasts that never ceased their destruction. Yet throughout these horrors, the ancient Roman continued to provide both protection and instruction, helping his companion understand the divine justice that governed even these regions of seemingly endless suffering. As they approached the boundary between the 7th and 8th circles, the Florentine could see that their descent into the depths of human evil was far from complete. The worst sins, those of fraud and treachery, still lay below, in regions where the very architecture of hell would become even more intricate and terrible. But already he had learned that every sin carries within itself the seeds of its own punishment, and that the divine order extends even into the realms where that order seems most completely overthrown. At the edge of the 7th circle, where the final ring of the violent meets the abyss of fraud, the 2 poets encountered a sight both magnificent and terrible. Here was Geryon, the monster of deception, whose appearance embodied the very nature of fraud itself. This creature possessed the face of a just man, so benign was his outward aspect, but his entire body was that of a serpent. 2 hairy paws served as his arms, while his back, chest, and both sides were painted with knots and circlets more elaborate than any tapestry ever woven by Tartar or Turk. The beast of fraud had emerged from the depths at the Roman master's call, swimming through the thick air with the same ease that a beaver positions itself to fish. His tail floated free in the void, and its venomous fork could sting like a scorpion's. This creature would serve as their vessel for the descent into the 8th circle, though the prospect filled the Florentine with terror. Before their departure on this fearsome mount, they encountered 3 noble Florentines from the circle of the violent against God: Guido Guerra, Tegiaio Aldobrandi, and Jacopo Rusticucci. These spirits, burning eternally under the rain of fire that fell upon the 3rd ring of violence, spoke with the living poet about the current state of their beloved Florence. Their words carried both anguish for their city's moral decline and pride in their own former greatness. Tell us if courtesy and valor still dwell in our city as they once did, they pleaded, or if they have utterly departed. For Guglielmo Borsier, who has been with us in torment only a short time, and travels with our companions there, greatly grieves us with his reports. These words moved the visitor to such sorrow that he replied with heartfelt lament. The new people and sudden gains have generated pride and excess in you, Florence, so that you already weep for it. When Virgil signaled that it was time to depart, the poet mounted the terrible beast behind his teacher. Now, Geryon, move yourself, the ancient Roman commanded. Let your circles be wide and your descent gradual. Consider the new burden that you carry. As a small ship moves backward from its berth, so the monster withdrew from the edge, and when he felt himself completely free, he turned his tail to where his chest had been and extended it like an eel, gathering air to himself with his paws. The descent into Malebolge, the eighth circle of hell, revealed a landscape of unprecedented complexity and horror. This realm of fraud was structured like a vast amphitheatre, divided into 10 concentric pouches called bulge, each containing a different category of fraudulent sinners. Bridges of dark stone spanned these ravines, allowing passage from one to the next, while demons of various types supervised the punishments with gleeful cruelty. In the first pouch, the seducers and pandas ran eternally in opposite directions, whipped by horned demons who struck them cruelly from behind. Here the writer recognized Venedico Caccianemico, a Bolognese who had trafficked his own sister for political gain. What brings you to these steep slopes? The sinner asked. Are you still alive, or are you dead? When he learned that his questioner lived and breathed, Venedico revealed his identity reluctantly, driven by the clear speech that forced recognition. Moving to the second ravine, they discovered the flatterers immersed in excrement that seemed to have come from human privies. The stench was so overwhelming that the poets had to cover their noses as they peered into this foul pit. Here wallowed those who had corrupted language itself, using words not to reveal truth, but to deceive and manipulate. Among them was Alessio Interminelli of Lucca, whose head was so befouled with filth that it was unclear whether he wore a clerical tonsure or was simply a layman. The third chasm contained the Simonists, those who had bought and sold sacred offices in the church. These souls were planted headfirst in round holes, with only their feet visible above ground, and the soles of their feet burned with flames. The arrangement was such that the feet of each new arrival would push the previous occupant deeper into the earth, ensuring that the most recent offenders received the fiercest punishment. Among these inverted figures, one pair of feet burned more intensely than the rest. When the Roman teacher carried his charge down into the gulf to speak with this soul, the voice of Pope Nicholas III emerged from the hole. Are you already standing there, Boniface? Are you already standing there? The scripture lied to me by several years. Are you so quickly sated with those riches for which you did not fear to take the beautiful lady by guile and then to ravage her? The confusion arose because Nicholas had expected the arrival of Pope Boniface VIII, whom he knew was destined for the same punishment. When the Florentine explained the error, Nicholas revealed the prophetic nature of their knowledge in hell, describing how Boniface would in turn be pushed down by the arrival of Pope Clement V, an even more corrupt pontiff who would make Jason of the Maccabees seem virtuous by comparison. Ah, Constantine, the damned pope lamented, how much wickedness was born, not from your conversion, but from that dowry which the first rich father received from you. This was a reference to the donation of Constantine, which had given the papacy temporal power and wealth, leading to the corruption of the church's spiritual mission. The fourth valley presented a sight that moved the living poet to tears. The fortune tellers and diviners, their heads twisted backward so that they could only see what lay behind them. Tears flowed down their backs to the cleft between their buttocks as they walked slowly in their eternal procession. Among them were Amphiaraus, who had tried to avoid his prophesied death at Thebes, Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, and Manto, after whom the city of Mantua was named. Virgil sternly rebuked his charge for showing pity. Here piety lives when it is completely dead. Who is more impious than one who subjects divine judgment to passion? The punishment fit the crime perfectly. Those who had tried to see too far into the future were now condemned to see only the past, their necks twisted in a grotesque reversal of their earthly presumption. In the fifth gorge, the corrupt politicians were boiled in a lake of pitch, guarded by the Malebranche, malicious clawed demons who delighted in tormenting their charges. These black devils ensured that the sinners remained submerged in the boiling tar, just as corrupt officials had operated in the dark shadows of political dealings. The demons bore names that reflected their malicious nature: Malacoda, Barbaricia, Alicino, Calcabrina, and others whose very appellations suggested violence and deceit. The poets witnessed the arrival of a new sinner, a magistrate from Lucca, carried by a black devil who mocked him. Here there's no place for the holy face. Here one swims differently than in the Circio. So unless you want to feel my hooks, don't rise above the pitch. The demon then thrust the official into the tar and departed, like a mastiff released by his master. The sixth trench contained the hypocrites, who walked in a slow procession, wearing gilded lead cloaks that appeared magnificent from the outside, but were so heavy they could barely move. These souls, who had presented false appearances in life, now bore the weight of their deception for eternity. Among them were Catalano and Loderingo, two jovial friars from Bologna, who had claimed to maintain peace but had actually fomented discord in Florence. Most striking in this ravine was the figure of Caiaphas, the high priest who had counseled that Christ should die for the people. He lay crucified on the ground, and all the other hypocrites were forced to step on him as they passed. He who had given false counsel was now trampled by those who had followed similar paths of deception. The seventh channel writhed with thieves, who were pursued and bitten by serpents in an endless dance of transformation. Here Vanni Fucci, a bastard from Pistoia, suffered among the robbers of sacred objects. When a serpent bit him, he burst into flames and was immediately reconstituted from his own ashes, only to face the same torment again. This punishment reflected the nature of theft, the constant taking and losing, the instability of ill-gotten gains. The transformations in this pit were even more horrifying than simple burning and reconstitution. Some thieves merged with serpents in grotesque metamorphoses, their human forms blending with reptilian shapes in ways that defied natural law. Others exchanged forms entirely, man becoming snake and snake becoming man, in an eternal cycle that left their very identities unstable and confused. In the eighth moat burned the counsellors of fraud, each enclosed in a flame that corresponded to his guilt. Here the most famous encounter of the entire journey took place, as the poets met Ulysses and Diomedes, the Greek heroes who shared a flame for their joint deceptions during the Trojan War. Their punishment was to burn together for their shared sins: the stratagem of the Trojan horse, the theft of the Palladium, and the deception that lured Achilles from his hiding place. Ulysses spoke from within his flame, telling the story of his final voyage. a tale not found in any classical source, but created by the medieval poet to illustrate the tragedy of knowledge pursued without divine guidance. The Greek hero described how he had convinced his aging companions to sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the unknown Western Ocean, driven by an insatiable desire for experience and knowledge. "Consider your origin," Ulysses had told his men. "You were not made to live like brutes, but to pursue virtue and knowledge." Yet this noble sentiment was corrupted by pride and the presumption that human reason alone could achieve ultimate truth. Their ship was swallowed by a whirlwind within sight of the mountain of Purgatory, which they were not permitted to reach through their own efforts alone. The ninth passage contained the sowers of discord, split and mangled by a demon with a sword who stood at a narrow point in their circular path. As each sinner completed the circuit and returned to this point, his wounds would have partially healed, only to be split open again. The punishment perfectly matched the sin. Those who had divided others were themselves eternally divided. Here was Mahomet, split from chin to where one breaks wind, his entrails hanging between his legs. Beside him walked Ali, cleft in the face from forelock to chin. These figures represented religious schism in the medieval Christian view. Also present was Pierre de Medicina, who sowed political discord, and Mosca de Lamberti, whose malicious counsel had started the Guelph-Ghibelline conflict in Florence. Most pathetic was Bertrand de Born, the troubadour who had sowed discord between father and son. He carried his severed head like a lantern, holding it by the hair and speaking through its mouth. "You who, breathing, visit the dead, see if there is any pain as great as this, and so that you may carry news of me, know that I am Bertrand de Born, he who gave wicked counsel to the young king." The 10th and final crevice of Malebolge contained the falsifiers, suffering from various diseases that reflected their different types of deception. The alchemists were afflicted with leprosy and scabies, scratching themselves eternally. The counterfeiters suffered from dropsy, their bodies swollen with unnatural fluids. The false witnesses burned with fever, while the perjurers were afflicted with foul-smelling breath and other repulsive symptoms. Among the alchemists were Griffolino of Arezzo and Capocchio, former companions who now scratched each other's flesh with their nails. The counterfeiters included Master Adam, who had falsified the gold florins of Florence, and now suffered from the dropsy that made him resemble a lute in shape. He engaged in a bitter argument with Sinon of Troy, the false witness whose lies had enabled the Greeks to enter Troy with their wooden horse. At the center of Malebolge rose a well so deep and dark that no bottom could be seen. Around its rim stood a forest of giants, ancient rebels against divine authority, who served as living towers, guarding the approach to the 9th and final circle of hell. These included Nimrod, builder of the Tower of Babel, who spoke in incomprehensible language, Ephialtes, who had warred against the gods, and Antaeus, who had never fought against heaven and therefore retained some mobility. Antaeus, persuaded by Virgil's flattery and the promise that the living poet would restore his fame on earth, lifted the two travellers in his enormous hands and lowered them gently to the bottom of the well, placing them on the floor of the 9th circle before straightening up like the mast of a ship. Here, in the frozen lake of Cocytus, betrayers suffered the ultimate punishment. The lake was divided into 4 regions, named after the greatest betrayers of history and legend. Cana, for those who betrayed family. Antenora, for those who betrayed country. Ptolemaea, for those who betrayed guests, and Judeca, for those who betrayed lords and benefactors. The cold here was so intense that tears froze in the sinners' eyes before they could fall, creating icy masks of perpetual anguish. In Caina, the poets encountered brothers who had killed each other, Napoleone and Alessandro degli Alberti, whose mutual hatred had led to their destruction. Their heads were so close together that their hair intermingled, yet they remained eternal enemies, frozen in the ice that held them prisoner. Antenora contained those who had betrayed their homeland, among them Count Ugolino della Gherardesca, whose story would become one of the most horrifying in all of literature. The Florentine found him gnawing on the skull of Archbishop Ruggieri, and when asked to explain this gruesome meal, Ugolino raised his mouth from its savage repast and wiped it on the hair of the head he had been devouring. Ugolino's tale was one of political betrayal, followed by unimaginable cruelty. After being imprisoned with his sons and grandsons in a tower in Pisa, they were left to starve by the vengeful Ruggieri. Day by day, the children died of hunger, while their father watched helplessly. In his final agony, Ugolino confessed that fasting proved more powerful than grief, words that suggested he had been driven to cannibalism in his desperation. After I was dead, Ugolino concluded his narrative, hunger did what grief could not. Now in hell, he gained a terrible satisfaction from eternally devouring the brain of the man who had orchestrated his family's destruction, though this revenge could never truly satisfy his anguish or restore what had been lost. In Ptolemais, those who had betrayed guests were buried deeper in the ice, with only their faces above the surface, but even their tears were frozen in their eye sockets, preventing the relief that weeping might provide. Here was Fra Alberigo, who had invited his relatives to a feast and then had them murdered during the meal. Most remarkably, Alberigo revealed that some souls fall to this region immediately upon committing their ultimate betrayal, while their bodies continue to live on earth, possessed by demons. Finally, in Giudecca, those who had betrayed their lords and benefactors were completely encased in the ice, visible only as shadows beneath the frozen surface. No words could be heard from them, no movement seen. They were locked in eternal silence and immobility, their very existence negated by the magnitude of their betrayals. At the center of this frozen waste stood Satan himself, Dis, the emperor of the dolorous realm. This ultimate figure of malice was not the magnificent fallen angel of popular imagination, but a grotesque giant trapped waist-deep in the ice, his three faces chewing eternally on the three greatest betrayers in history. In the central mouth, head first and most tormented, was Judas Iscariot, who had betrayed Christ. In the left mouth was Brutus, and in the right, Cassius, both betrayers of Julius Caesar, who in medieval thought represented divine imperial authority. The sight of Satan was both terrifying and pitiable. His three faces wept tears that mixed with bloody foam and flowed down his three chins. Each mouth was a mill for grinding sinners, and the beating of his 6 wings created the wind that kept Cocytus frozen. This creature, who had once been the most beautiful of all angels, was now trapped in the ice by his own weight, the fixed point around which all the malevolence of hell revolved. To escape from hell, the poets had to climb down Satan's hairy body, passing through the center of the earth itself. At the midpoint of this descent, Virgil suddenly turned upside down, and when they emerged on the other side, they found that Satan's legs extended upward into what was now a different sky. They had passed through the center of the earth and emerged in the southern hemisphere, where the mountain of Purgatory rose from the ocean toward the stars. The journey through hell had revealed the complete taxonomy of human wickedness, from the least serious sins of incontinence, through the more grave sins of violence, to the ultimate transgression of betrayal. Each punishment had been precisely calibrated to reflect the nature of the sin, demonstrating that divine justice operates even in the depths of damnation. The frozen lake at the bottom of hell, where Satan himself was trapped, showed that malice ultimately leads not to power or freedom, but to complete paralysis and isolation. As they climbed toward the light of the stars, the two poets carried with them the memory of all they had witnessed, the tears of the damned, the eternal repetition of their punishments, and the perfect justice that ensured each soul received exactly what their earthly choices had merited. The descent through hell had been a journey through the human heart's capacity for wrongdoing, but it had also revealed the divine order that governs all creation, extending even into the realms where that order appears to have been most completely rejected. To run over better waters, the little vessel of my genius now hoists its sails, leaving behind that cruel sea which had held them captive for so long. Now I shall sing of that second realm, where the human spirit is purged and becomes worthy to ascend to heaven. Here let dead poetry rise again, O sacred muses, since I am yours, and here let Calliope rise somewhat, accompanying my song with that sound which struck the wretched magpies so that they despaired of pardon. Sweet colour of oriental sapphire that was gathering in the serene aspect of the sky, pure to the first circle, renewed delight in my eyes as soon as I issued forth from the dead air that had afflicted my chest and eyes. The beautiful planet that encourages love was making the whole Orient laugh, veiling the fishes that were in her train. I turned to the right and gave my mind to the other pole, and saw 4 stars never seen before except by the first people. The sky seemed to rejoice in their flames. O northern region, how widowed you are, since you are deprived of beholding them. When I had withdrawn my gaze from them, turning a little toward the other pole, from where the wane had already disappeared, I saw near me an old man, alone, worthy in appearance of so much reverence that no son owes more to his father. He wore a long beard mixed with white hair, similar to his locks, of which 2 tresses fell upon his chest. The rays of the 4 holy stars so adorned his face with light that I saw him as if the sun were before him. "Who are you, who against the blind stream have fled the eternal prison?" said he, moving those venerable plumes. "Who has guided you, or what was a lamp to you, issuing forth from the deep night that always makes the infernal valley black? Are the laws of the abyss thus broken, or is a fresh counsel changed in heaven, that being damned you come to my rocks?" This was Cato the Younger, guardian of this sacred mountain, that noble Roman who had chosen death rather than submit to Caesar's tyranny, now transformed into a figure of sublime authority, overseeing the realm of cleansing. My teacher then laid his hands upon me, and with words and with signs made me revere my legs and brow, revealing to Cato that the journey was divinely ordained, and that the living man travelled not by his own will, but by command of a lady from heaven. "Lucia moved against your enemy," Virgil explained, speaking of the celestial intervention that had set this journey in motion. The Roman master revealed that they sought freedom, that precious liberty for which Cato himself had died at Utica, where he had left the garment that on the great day will be so bright. He promised that the living visitor would tell the world of Cato's heroic virtue, if grace were granted to complete this sacred pilgrimage. The guardian of the mountain, satisfied with this explanation, commanded that they gird the writer's waist with a smooth rush and wash his face to remove all traces of hell's grime. This little island, down there around at the very bottom where the waves beat it, bears rushes on its soft mud. No other plant, neither anything that makes leaves nor anything that hardens, can live there, because it does not yield to the buffetings. After performing these cleansing rituals at the shore, they began their exploration of this realm. Here was no eternal punishment, but rather a process of healing and growth. The spirits on this mountain had been saved by heavenly grace, and now worked actively to purge themselves of the stains of sin, preparing for their eventual ascent to paradise. As dawn broke over the island mountain, they witnessed a sight of indescribable beauty. An angel approached over the waters, so swift that no flight equals his motion, piloting a vessel with more than 100 beings aboard. This celestial figure, whose face was radiant with sacred light, served as ferryman for spirits coming to the mountain, replacing the grim Charon who had transported the damned across Acheron. In XXXII, Israel de Egipto, sang all those spirits together with a single voice, continuing the psalm to its end. The angel made the sign of the Holy Cross over them, whereupon they all threw themselves upon the shore, and he departed as swiftly as he had come, leaving the newly arrived penitents to begin their own journeys of cleansing. Among these recent arrivals, the Florentine recognized an old friend, Casella, a musician who had often set the author's own verses to melody. Their reunion was marked by profound joy, though tinged with the recognition that they now inhabited different realms of existence. When the writer asked Casella to sing as he had done in life, the musician's voice rose in beautiful harmony, performing a canzone from the visitor's own work, Love that speaks with me in my mind. The sweetness of Casella's song so enchanted all who heard it that they remained motionless, absorbed in the melody. But this peaceful moment was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Cato, who rebuked the spirits for their delay. What negligence, what delay is this? Run to the mountain to strip off the slough that does not let God be manifest to you. Like doves that, scattered at their feeding place, abandon their food if something appears of which they are afraid. So the spirits abandoned their gathering and rushed toward the mountain where the righteous ascend. Such was the authority of Cato that even this moment of transcendent beauty had to give way to the urgent work of spiritual cleansing. The two poets began their ascent up the shore of the mountain, coming to the region known as Ante-Purgatory, where beings who had delayed repentance until the last moments of their lives must wait before beginning their active cleansing. This was a place of magnificent natural beauty, where the very landscape seemed to reflect the hope and peace that characterized this realm. In the first area of Ante-Purgatory, they encountered the excommunicated, those who had died under the church's ban but had repented before death. These penitents, though excluded from the sacraments in life, were not damned, but merely had to wait before beginning their cleansing process. Their leader was Manfred, the illegitimate son of Emperor Frederick II, whose political struggles with the papacy had resulted in his excommunication and death at the Battle of Benevento. Manfred's appearance was noble despite the wounds he bore from his final battle. "I am Manfred," he declared, "grandson of the Empress Constance, wherefore I beg you, when you return, go to my beautiful daughter, mother of the honor of Sicily and Aragon, and tell her the truth if other is told." He revealed how, despite his excommunication, he had repented in his final moments, and infinite goodness had prevailed over ecclesiastical condemnation. "Horrible were my sins," Manfred confessed, "but the infinite goodness has such wide arms that it receives whatever turns to it. If the pastor of Cosenza, who was set on the hunt for me by Clement, had then read well this page of God, the bones of my body would still be at the bridgehead near Benevento, under the guard of the heavy cairn." The tale revealed how political enmity had extended even beyond death, with the Pope ordering Manfred's body to be removed from consecrated ground. Yet heavenly justice transcended human judgment, and the excommunicated prince had found his way to salvation, despite the church's condemnation. Continuing their journey through Ante-Purgatory, they encountered the indolent, those who had delayed repentance not through active rebellion, but through spiritual laziness. These spirits were required to experience urgency in death that they had lacked in life, spending time equal to their earthly years in this region before proceeding to the 7 Terraces proper. Among the indolent was Belacqua, a character perhaps based on a contemporary of the author known for his slothfulness. This spirit sat in the shade of a great rock, his arms encircling his knees and his head bowed down between them in a posture of complete lethargy. When questioned about his condition, Belacqua replied with characteristic laziness, "Brother, what use is climbing? For God's bird that sits at the gate would not let me go to the torments." Belacqua's words revealed a law governing this realm, that the gate to the 7 Terraces could only be opened during daylight hours, when an angel stood guard with his sword. At night, spirits could ascend no higher than they had reached before sunset, emphasizing that spiritual progress required heavenly illumination and could not be forced by human will alone. As the sun began to set, they encountered the negligent rulers, kings and princes who had been so occupied with earthly governance that they had neglected their spiritual duties. These noble beings gathered in a valley of remarkable beauty, filled with flowers of colours more vivid than any found on earth. Here they sang the Salve Regina and other hymns, their voices rising in harmonious prayer as darkness fell. Among these royal figures were some of the most prominent rulers of the age. Rudolph of Habsburg, who could have healed the wounds of Italy but had failed to do so. Ottokar of Bohemia, his former enemy, now reconciled in death. Philip III of France, Henry of Navarre, and Pedro III of Aragon. Their earthly conflicts seemed petty now in light of their shared need for cleansing and their common destiny of salvation. "See there the spirit who sits alone and apart," someone pointed out, indicating Henry III of England. "That fellow who sits lowest among them, looking downward, is William VII, Marquis of Montferrat, because of whom Alessandria and its war make Monferrato and Canavese weep." The sight of these once mighty rulers, now united in their humility and shared spiritual purpose, demonstrated how earthly power and glory fade before eternal concerns. As night deepened, the poets witnessed a dramatic scene that illustrated the ongoing spiritual warfare, even in this realm of hope. 2 angels descended from heaven, bearing flaming swords with broken points, clothed in green garments and with green wings. These celestial warriors took positions on either side of the valley, standing guard against the serpent that would attempt to tempt the penitents, as it had tempted Eve in the Garden of Eden. "Both come from the bosom of Mary," explained a spirit, "to guard the valley because of the serpent that will come presently." At these words, the author turned around, uncertain from which direction the threat would approach, and pressed closer to his trusted guide, feeling the familiar comfort of the Roman master's protective presence. Soon the ancient adversary appeared, not in the terrifying form he took in hell, but as a serpent that slithered through the grass and flowers. Yet even this diminished manifestation of temptation was quickly routed when the angels descended with rustling wings. The serpent fled, and the celestial guardians returned to their posts, their duty fulfilled with sacred efficiency. This nightly ritual demonstrated that even in this realm, the penitents remained vulnerable to temptation and required heavenly protection. Yet here, unlike in the mortal world, that protection was always adequate, and the forces of good always prevailed over darkness. During this eventful night, the Florentine met Nino Visconti, a friend from his political life in Florence, who expressed wonder at seeing the living man in this realm of the dead. Their conversation revealed both the joy of friendship that transcends death and the continuing concern of purified beings for those they had loved on earth. Nino asked the visitor to request prayers from his daughter Giovanna, revealing that the prayers of the living could indeed assist penitents, shortening their time of cleansing. "Tell my Giovanna to call on me there, where the innocent are answered," Nino requested, showing how love persists beyond death, and how the communion of saints creates bonds between the earthly and spiritual realms. This interconnectedness between the living and the dead was a great theme of this realm, demonstrating that salvation was not merely an individual matter, but involved the entire community of believers. As the night progressed, the author experienced his first prophetic dream in this place. In this vision, a golden eagle descended from the sky and carried him upward, as Jupiter's bird had once carried Ganymede to serve as cupbearer to the gods. The dream symbolized sacred grace lifting the spirit toward heaven, though the experience was so intense that it woke the dreamer with its fire. Upon awakening, the Florentine found himself in a different location, transported by St. Lucia while he slept. This blessed figure, representing illuminating grace, had carried him higher up the mountain to the very gate where the active work of cleansing would begin. The dream had been prophetic of this celestial assistance, showing how grace works even when the spirit is unconscious of its operation. Before them now rose the gate itself, approached by 3 steps of different materials and colors. The first step was white marble, so polished that it reflected the writer's true appearance. The second was darker than purple, made of rough stone that was cracked across its width and length. The third was porphyry, as red as blood spurting from a vein, and upon this final step rested both feet of God's angel. The angel who guarded this entrance sat upon the threshold, which seemed to be made of diamond. His countenance was so bright that the author could not sustain the sight directly. In his hand, he held a naked sword that reflected the light so fiercely that it repeatedly struck the observer's eyes, making clear vision impossible. "Tell me from there, what do you want?" the celestial guardian asked. "Where is your escort? Take care that your coming up does not harm you." The Roman master explained their sacred mission and requested passage, whereupon the angel welcomed them graciously, but warned of the commitment required for those who would enter the mountain proper. "Come forward, then, to our steps," the angel said. But first he inscribed 7 P's upon the visitor's forehead with the point of his sword, the 7 letters representing the 7 deadly sins that would be purged on the mountain's terraces. "See that you wash these wounds when you are inside," the guardian commanded, explaining that each P would be removed as the corresponding sin was cleansed from the spirit. Drawing 2 keys from beneath his robes, silver and gold, the angel explained their significance. The first is more precious, but the other requires more art and wit before it unlocks, because it is the key that unties the knot. I have them from Peter, and he told me to err rather in opening than in keeping shut, provided that people prostrate themselves at my feet. With these keys, the angel opened the sacred portal, warning that anyone who looked back while passing through would be forced to return outside. The hinges groaned as the massive doors swung open, and from within came the sound of voices singing Te Deum Laudamus, that ancient hymn of praise that proclaimed God's eternal glory and mankind's redemption. As they crossed the threshold, the sounds of singing mixed with the harmonies of instruments created such sweet music that the visitor experienced both joy and sorrow. joy at the beauty of the melody, sorrow that it could not be heard more clearly. Like the sound of singing mixed with the music of an organ, where sometimes the words are clear and sometimes they are not. So came this first sound from the terraces above. Thus began the active phase of the writer's journey toward cleansing and redemption. Behind lay the realm of the lost, with its eternal punishments and hopeless despair. Ahead rose the mountain of hope, where penitents worked actively with heavenly grace to strip away the accumulated stains of sin and prepare themselves for the beatific vision that awaited in paradise. The transition from hell to this realm marked not just a change of location, but a fundamental transformation in the nature of existence itself, from despair to hope, from eternal stasis to dynamic growth, from isolation to community, from punishment to healing. Beyond the sacred portal, the two poets entered the first level of the mountain proper, where pride, the root of all sin, was systematically purged from the human soul. Here the landscape itself served as instruction, for carved into the marble pathway were examples of humility so lifelike that they seemed to move and speak. These sculptures, wrought by celestial artistry that surpassed any earthly skill, presented three categories of exemplars: biblical, classical, and contemporary. The first scene depicted the Annunciation, where the Virgin Mary received the angel Gabriel's message with perfect submission to God's will. XXXIV, the carved figures seem to speak. Behold the handmaid of the Lord, demonstrating the humility that had opened the path to human redemption. The artistry was so perfect that the carved angel appeared to be speaking, while Mary's posture expressed complete acceptance of the heavenly plan. The second relief showed King David dancing before the Ark of the Covenant, his royal dignity cast aside in humble worship. His wife Michal looked on with disdain from a palace window, her pride contrasting sharply with David's self-abandonment before the Almighty. The carving captured not only the physical movements, but the inner attitudes of both figures, teaching that true nobility lies in humble service rather than worldly dignity. The third example depicted the Roman Emperor Trajan, who had dismounted from his horse to hear the plea of a poor widow seeking justice for her murdered son. Though eager to depart for war, the emperor had stopped to ensure that justice was done for the lowliest of his subjects. This scene demonstrated how true authority manifests itself through service to others rather than the assertion of power. As they studied these marvels of celestial craftsmanship, they encountered the penitents of the first level, the proud who now learned humility through their punishment. These souls bent double under enormous stones, their bodies forced into postures of submission that countered their former arrogance. Yet their suffering was voluntary and purposeful, aimed at reshaping their souls rather than merely inflicting pain. The weight each soul carried corresponded exactly to the degree of pride they had harbored in life. Some were so bent that their faces nearly touched the ground, while others maintained slightly more upright postures. All recited the Lord's Prayer together, though they modified the traditional words to reflect their situation. Our Father, who art in heaven, give us this day our daily manna, for without it, in this rough desert, he who strives most to advance goes backward. Among these penitents was Umberto Aldobrandeschi, a Tuscan count whose noble lineage had filled him with such pride that it had led to his destruction. I was Italian, he confessed to the Florentine, and son of a great Tuscan. Guglielmo Aldobrandeschi was my father. I do not know if his name was ever familiar to you. The ancient blood and the gallant deeds of my ancestors made me so arrogant that, not thinking of our common mother, I held all men in such scorn that it killed me. Near Umberto crawled Oderisi of Gubbio, the renowned illuminator whose manuscripts had been prized throughout Italy. Now he spoke of the vanity of artistic fame and worldly recognition. Brother, more smiling are the pages that Franco of Bologna paints. The honor is now all his, and mine only in part. Truly I would not have been so courteous while I lived, because of the great desire for excellence in which my heart was focused. Oderisi's words revealed the insight that comes with cleansing. He now understood that his pursuit of artistic glory had been tainted with pride and competitiveness. "Oh, empty glory of human powers," he exclaimed. "How briefly lasts the green upon the summit, unless an age of dullness follows. Cimabue thought to hold the field in painting, and now Giotto has the cry, so that the fame of the former is obscured." The conversation with Oderisi provided one of the most moving meditations on the nature of earthly fame and its ultimate insignificance. The illuminator spoke of how reputations rise and fall like waves, how today's celebrated master becomes tomorrow's forgotten figure. This lesson in humility was perfectly suited to the poet's own struggles with pride and his desire for literary immortality. Moving deeper into the first level, they encountered Provenzano Salvani, a Sienese leader whose political pride had dominated Tuscany until his dramatic fall from power. His presence in this relatively advanced stage of the cleansing process surprised the visitor, until he learned that Provenzano's time had been shortened by a single act of genuine humility performed late in life. "In the marketplace of Siena," explained a fellow penitent, freeing himself from all shame, he took his stand, and there, to deliver his friend from the suffering he endured in Charles's prison, brought himself to tremble in every vein. This act, begging publicly for money to ransom a friend, had demonstrated such complete abandonment of pride that it had accelerated Provenzano's progress. As they completed their circuit of the first level, an angel appeared, whose beauty was almost too brilliant to perceive directly. This celestial being, representing the virtue that opposed pride, struck the writer's forehead with his wing, removing the first P that had been inscribed there. The sensation was one of profound relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from his soul. The angel's voice rang out with the first beatitude: "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." As they ascended to the second level, the visitor felt his movement had become easier, though he did not immediately understand why, until Virgil explained that each removed P made the ascent lighter and more natural. The second level purged the sin of envy through examples of charity and generosity that countered the spirit of competition and resentment. Here the penitents sat with their backs against the mountain wall, their eyes sewn shut with silver wire and their faces turned toward the sun. Tears flowed from beneath their closed lids as they contemplated examples of compassion that they heard proclaimed by invisible voices. "Mary hastened to the hills," called the first voice, recounting how the Virgin had rushed to help her cousin Elizabeth after the Annunciation. The second voice told of Pylades and Orestes, whose friendship was so perfect that each was willing to die for the other. The third proclaimed, "Cherish those by whom you have been injured," demonstrating the highest form of charity that transforms enemies into friends. The punishment of the envious perfectly countered their sin. Those who had taken pleasure in others' misfortunes now contemplated examples of selfless caring, while their sealed eyes prevented them from seeing anything that might provoke competitive feelings. They sang the litany of the saints together, their voices creating a harmony that spoke of the unity they were learning to embrace. Among these penitents was Sapia of Siena, whose name ironically meant wise, though she had been filled with envy toward her fellow citizens. She confessed to the poet how she had rejoiced when the Sienese army was defeated at Colle Valdelsa, even though her own nephew fought among them. "I feared God less than a blackbird," she admitted, "because of the few years that remained to me." Sapia's story revealed how envy could poison even natural affections, making someone rejoice in their own community's suffering. Yet her presence on the level showed that genuine repentance could overcome even such deep-seated malice. She asked the visitor to restore her reputation among the living and to request prayers from her relatives, demonstrating how the bonds of affection could be renewed even after such corruption. The ascent to the third level was marked by another angelic encounter and the removal of a second P. Here wrath was purged through meditation on examples of meekness and through exposure to blinding smoke that forced the penitents to rely entirely on hearing and touch. The smoke was so dense that it made the air seem black as night, demonstrating how anger clouds vision and isolates the soul from illumination. The voices in the smoke proclaimed examples of gentleness. The Virgin Mary's calm response when she found the young Jesus in the temple, St. Stephen's forgiveness of those who stoned him, and Emperor Hadrian's mercy toward those who had wronged him. These examples taught the angry souls how to respond to injury with patience rather than retaliation. Within the smoke, the poets encountered Marco Lombardo, a courtier who engaged the writer in a profound discussion about free will and moral responsibility. This conversation addressed some of the deepest theological questions raised by the entire journey. If human souls are shaped by celestial influences, how can they be held responsible for their choices? Marco's response provided crucial insight into the relationship between fate and freedom. You, who are living, refer every cause to the heavens alone, as if they swept all things along with them by necessity. If this were so, free will would be destroyed in you, and there would be no justice in having joy for good or grief for evil. The wise courtier explained that while the stars may influence human temperament, they do not compel specific choices. Each soul possesses the light of reason and the freedom to choose between good and evil. The corruption of the world, Marco argued, comes not from celestial necessity, but from poor leadership and the failure of earthly institutions to provide proper guidance. Rome, which made the good world, used to have two suns, which lit up both paths, that of the world and that of God, Marco declared, referring to the proper relationship between ecclesiastical and temporal authority. The confusion of these spheres had led to moral chaos, but individual souls remained free to choose the path of virtue, regardless of external circumstances. The fourth level addressed sloth, laziness that hindered souls from pursuing virtue with appropriate zeal. Here the penitents ran continuously around the mountain, calling out examples of zeal and speed in pursuing good, while also reciting instances of historical slowness that had led to disaster. The voices proclaimed, "Mary rose up and went with haste into the hill country," showing the Virgin's eagerness to serve. They recalled Julius Caesar's swift march to Spain during the civil wars, demonstrating how even secular enterprises required energetic pursuit. They also warned of the Israelites who died in the wilderness because of their reluctance to enter the promised land, showing how sloth could prevent souls from reaching their destiny. Among the runners was the abbot of San Zeno, who paused briefly to speak with the poets before resuming his eternal exercise. He denounced Frederick Barbarossa as "that beast," referring to the emperor's conflicts with the church, and prophesied sorrow for someone who had appointed his illegitimate son to a religious position. The abbot's words demonstrated how even in the midst of their cleansing, souls remained concerned with justice and proper order in earthly affairs. As night fell on the fourth level, all movement ceased according to the law that governed the mountain. During this rest, the poet experienced his second prophetic dream, a vision of the siren who had led Ulysses and so many others to destruction through the false promise of knowledge and pleasure. In the dream, the siren appeared first as an ugly, stammering woman, but the writer's gaze transformed her into a beautiful singer whose voice promised ultimate satisfaction. "I am sweet siren," she sang, "who led mariners astray in the midst of the sea. So great is the pleasure to hear me." Yet even as she sang, a holy lady appeared and called upon Virgil to expose the siren's true nature. When the Roman master tore away her garments, the stench that emerged woke the dreamer from his dangerous fascination. This dream symbolized the ongoing temptation that could lead even purified souls astray if they were not constantly vigilant. The siren represented all forms of false fulfillment that promised complete satisfaction, but ultimately left the soul empty and lost. Only grace, represented by the Holy Lady, could provide the strength to resist such powerful illusions. The fifth level addressed avarice and prodigality, the excessive attachment to material possessions and their reckless squandering. Here the penitents lay face down on the ground, their hands and feet bound, weeping tears that soaked the earth. This position forced them to contemplate their earthly attachments, while their bonds prevented them from grasping after worldly goods. "My soul cleaves to the dust," they recited from Psalm 119. "Quicken me according to your word." Their prone position symbolized how attachment to earthly things had weighed down their souls, preventing them from rising toward concerns. Yet their willing acceptance of this humiliation showed their understanding that such discipline was necessary for their liberation. Among these penitents was Pope Adrian V, who had reigned for only 38 days, but had learned profound lessons about the nature of earthly power and responsibility. "Know that I was a successor of Peter," he told the writer, "and that the great mantle falls upon us all in such a way that all previous burdens seem light in comparison." Adrian explained how his brief experience of papal authority had shown him both the tremendous responsibility it entailed and his own inadequacy to bear it worthily. His rapid death had been a mercy that prevented him from being further corrupted by power, though it had also cut short any good he might have accomplished. His presence on the mountain showed that even the highest earthly offices could not substitute for genuine development. The encounter with Adrian provided another meditation on the relationship between earthly authority and worthiness. The Pope's humility in death contrasted sharply with the pride that often accompanies high office in life. His willingness to speak as an equal with the living visitor, despite his former exalted position, demonstrated the leveling effect of insight. The ascent to the sixth level was accompanied by the removal of the fifth P and the angel's proclamation of another beatitude. "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." Here gluttony was purged through a punishment that combined physical hunger with longing, teaching souls to distinguish between necessary nourishment and sinful indulgence. The penitents of the sixth level were emaciated to an almost skeletal degree, their eyes sunken deep in their sockets so that they resembled the letter M when viewed from the front. They stood beneath two trees whose fruit remained forever just out of reach, while clear water cascaded down the rock face nearby. The tantalizing proximity of food and drink that could not be consumed taught them the proper relationship between desire and satisfaction. A voice from the first tree proclaimed examples of temperance. The Virgin Mary's concern at the wedding feast of Cana was not for more wine, but for the honor of the hosts and the ancient Roman women who were content with water for their drink. From the second tree came reminders of the destructive power of gluttony, the centaurs who were defeated by wine at Pirithouse's wedding, and Gideon's soldiers who were rejected for lapping water like dogs. Among the gluttons was Foresi Donati, the poet's dear friend, whose early death had cut short a life of indulgence and excess. Their reunion was deeply moving, marked by mutual recognition, despite Foresi's drastically altered appearance. The friendship that had once been based on shared pleasures was now transformed into companionship, based on shared understanding of truth. Foresi's presence on the mountain, despite his relatively recent death, was explained by the prayers of his virtuous wife Nella, whose devotion had shortened his time in ante-purgatory. This revelation provided another example of how the living could assist the dead through prayer and good works, demonstrating the interconnectedness of the entire community of faith. The conversation with Foresi also included sharp criticism of the women of Florence, whose immodest dress and behavior scandalized the social order. This critique served as a reminder that moral corruption affected entire communities, not just individuals, and that social reform required attention to public as well as private virtue. Also present on the 6th level was Bonagiunta de Luca, a writer of the previous generation, who engaged the visitor in a discussion about the development of literary style. Bonagiunta recognized in the Florentine the originator of the sweet new style that had revolutionized Italian poetry, particularly in the canzone, ladies who have intelligence of affection. But tell me, if I see here the inventor of the new rhymes that begin, ladies who have intelligence of affection, Bonagiunta inquired. When the poet modestly explained that he simply wrote down what inspiration dictated to his heart, Bonagiunta understood the difference between his own more artificial approach and the authentic inspiration that marked truly great poetry. This literary discussion provided important insight into the nature of artistic creation and its relationship to development. True poetry, like progress, required complete openness to inspiration, rather than reliance on human technique alone. The sweet new style was revolutionary, precisely because it eliminated the barrier between the writer's personal experience and his artistic expression. The 7th and final level addressed lust, the sin that, while lowest in the hierarchy of evil, required the most dramatic cleansing, because it involved the very forces of attraction that, when properly ordered, led souls toward God. Here the penitents walked through walls of flame that burned away their disordered desires while leaving their capacity for affection intact. The flames that surrounded the 7th level were not instruments of torture, but of transformation. They burned with the same fire that would eventually unite the purified soul with the Almighty, teaching the penitents to distinguish between affection properly ordered toward God and neighbor, and passion disordered toward inappropriate objects or expressed in destructive ways. The penitents on this level were divided into 2 groups that moved in opposite directions around the mountain. One group consisted of those who had been guilty of heterosexual lust, while the other included those who had committed the sin of Sodom. When the groups met, they exchanged brief kisses of greeting and called out examples of chastity and virtue before continuing their eternal procession. Among the lustful, the poets encountered Guido Guinizelli, the master writer who had established the foundations of the dolce stil novo that the visitor had brought to perfection. Guinizelli humbly acknowledged his pupil's superiority while pointing out Arnaud Daniel, the Provençal troubadour whom he considered the greatest craftsman in the art of poetry. Arnaud addressed the visitors in his native Provençal, creating one of the most beautiful passages in the entire work. Tan m'abellis vostra cortes deman, he began. So pleasing to me is your courteous request. His speech combined acknowledgement of his past sins with joyful anticipation of future bliss, demonstrating how genuine repentance could transform even the memory of sin into a source of gratitude for mercy. The encounter with these two great writers provided a meditation on the relationship between earthly poetry and development. Both Guinizelli and Arnauld had been masters of verses celebrating human affection, yet their presence on the mountain showed that such poetry, when inspired by genuine feeling, could serve as preparation for the highest form of devotion rather than an obstacle to it. As they prepared to enter the flames themselves, Virgil delivered his final speech to his beloved charge, marking the end of his role as guide and teacher. "My son," he said, "you have seen the temporal fire and the eternal, and have reached a place where I can discern no farther by myself. I have brought you here with wit and art. From here on, let your pleasure be your guide." The Roman master explained that they had now moved beyond the realm where human reason could serve as an adequate guide. The flames ahead represented the boundary between the world of active cleansing and the earthly paradise where grace would take over completely. Virgil's wisdom, though profound, was limited by its purely human perspective and could not penetrate the mysteries that lay beyond. "Free, upright, and whole is your will," Virgil concluded, "and it would be a fault not to act according to its prompting. Therefore, over yourself I crown and mitre you." With these words, he granted his pupil complete autonomy, recognizing that the development achieved through their journey had restored the writer's original innocence and wisdom. The passage through the flames was the final test of the poet's commitment to transformation. The fire was so intense that it would have melted glass, yet Virgil encouraged his charge by reminding him that beyond these flames lay Beatrice, the embodiment of illumination who awaited their reunion. Only the thought of seeing her again gave the Florentine courage to enter the purifying fire. The experience of the flames was indescribable, a burning that seemed to consume everything earthly, while leaving the essential self not only intact, but purified and strengthened. When they emerged on the other side, an angel removed the final P from the visitor's forehead and pronounced the last beatitude. "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." As night fell on the 7th level, the writer experienced his third and final dream, a vision of Rachel and Leah, the wives of Jacob who symbolized the contemplative and active life respectively. Rachel sat before a mirror, gazing at her own reflection, while Leah wove garlands from flowers she had gathered. This dream prepared the poet for the choice he would soon face between different forms of fulfillment. When morning came, the three poets found themselves at the edge of the earthly paradise, that garden where Adam and Eve had lived before the fall. Here, Virgil's guidance finally ended, and he gradually faded from view as grace took over the direction of the journey. The transformation was complete. The visitor had passed through the entire process of cleansing and was ready to encounter the highest form of illumination directly in the person of Beatrice herself. The ascent of the 7 levels had systematically addressed each of the deadly sins, showing how justice operated not through vengeance but through healing. Each punishment had been perfectly calibrated to transform the corresponding vice into virtue, demonstrating that even in the afterlife, God's purpose was redemptive rather than merely punitive. The mountain itself served as a great teaching device, where every element of the landscape contributed to the education of those who climbed its slopes, with sincere hearts and genuine determination to be transformed. Beyond the wall of flame lay a realm that defied all earthly comparison, the Garden of Eden restored to its original perfection, where humanity had first walked with God before the fall clouded the relationship between creator and creation. Here was a forest, ancient and dense, yet not dark like the wood of error where the journey had begun, but filled with gentle light that filtered through leaves which never fell, never withered, never changed with the seasons. A sweet breeze moved through this eternal spring, bending the branches always toward the direction where the holy mountain cast its morning shadow, yet not so strongly as to disturb the small birds in their artistry. They welcomed the dawn with full joy from within the leaves, singing and keeping time with the murmuring of the wind, just as the sound gathers from branch to branch through the pine forest on the shore of Chiasse, when Aeolus releases the south wind. As the Florentine wandered deeper into this paradise, drawn by wonder and increasing desire to explore its mysteries, his steps carried the traveller beyond where Virgil could follow. The Roman master's guidance had ended at the threshold of this sacred grove, for here human reason reached its limit and could penetrate no further into the secrets of grace. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. The presence that had been constant comfort and wisdom throughout the journey slowly faded until the visitor found himself alone in the garden where all things began. A stream appeared before the wanderer, clearer than any earthly water, yet so narrow that it would have been only 3 paces wide at its narrowest point. The waters flowed from left to right, and though they seemed shallow enough to wade through, some mysterious property prevented any crossing without proper preparation. On the far side of this brook, a solitary figure appeared among the flowers, a lady singing as she selected blossoms from the countless varieties that carpeted the opposite bank. "Please, beautiful lady," the author called across the stream, "you who warm yourself in the rays of love, if I may trust your face, which is usually the witness of the heart, may it please you to draw forward toward this stream, so that I can understand what you are singing. You make me remember where and what Proserpina was, at the time when her mother lost her and she lost spring." This mysterious figure was Matilda, though her name would not be revealed until later in their encounter. She moved with the grace of a woman dancing, her feet barely touching the flowers as she gathered them into garlands. Her eyes shone with the light of innocence, and her entire being radiated the joy that had filled the garden before sorrow entered the world through human disobedience. "You are newcomers," Matilda replied with a smile that recalled the first mother's happiness in this very place. "And perhaps because I smile in this place chosen as the nest of the human race, some wonder holds you marveling. But the psalm Delectasti sheds light that can clear the cloud from your understanding. And you who are in front and called to me, speak if you want to hear more, for I came ready for all your questions." The conversation that followed revealed the nature of this earthly paradise and its relationship to both human history and the journey of individual souls. Matilda explained that the stream which separated them was Lethe, the river of forgetfulness that would wash away all memory of sin from those who crossed its waters. On the far side of the garden flowed another river, Juno, which restored the memory of good deeds performed in life. "The water you see," Matilda continued, "does not spring from a vein restored by vapor that cold condenses, like a river that gains and loses flow, but issues from a fountain constant and sure, which regains by God's will as much as it pours forth on 2 sides. On this side, it descends with the power to take away memory of sin. On the other side, it restores memory of every good deed done." As they spoke, a light began to shine through the forest, growing brighter moment by moment, until the writer thought it might be lightning. Yet the illumination remained constant and continued to increase, causing wonder about what phenomenon could produce such brilliance. Soon, a sweet melody filled the air, and the visitor found himself reproaching Eve for her disobedience that had deprived humanity of this paradise for so many centuries. The source of the light and music soon became visible as the most magnificent procession ever witnessed by mortal eyes approached through the trees. 7 golden candlesticks led the way, their flames so bright they painted 7 bands of color across the sky behind them, the same hues that the sun creates in clouds and the moon in her circle. These represented the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, illuminating the path for what was to follow. Behind the candlesticks walked 24 elders, crowned with white lilies and singing, "Blessed are you among the daughters of Adam." These represented the books of the Old Testament, their white crowns symbolizing the purity of their faith and their position at the front of the procession, showing their role as preparation for what was to come. After this choir of elders came 4 creatures with 6 wings each, full of eyes like those described in Ezekiel's vision, representing the 4 Gospels. Their forms were too sacred to describe in detail, but each bore the face of a different being: man, lion, ox, and eagle, symbolizing the various aspects of Christ's nature and mission as revealed in the 4 Gospel accounts. Between these living creatures moved a triumphal chariot drawn by a griffin, that mysterious beast which was eagle in its upper parts and lion below, symbolizing Christ's dual nature as both divine and human. The golden feathers of the eagle caught the light, while the leonine body showed red and white, colors that recalled the incarnation's union of heaven and earth. Upon this chariot stood a lady veiled in white, crowned with olive, and clothed beneath her white veil in the color of living flame. Though her features were hidden, the Florentine spirit recognized her immediately, with a trembling that began in his very bones. This was the blessed soul who had guided his steps from afar, and now appeared to complete the work of transformation that Virgil had begun but could not finish. "Look at me carefully," she commanded. I am indeed your guide. How did you deign to approach the mountain? Did you not know that here humanity is happy?" The traveler's eyes fell to the clear stream, but seeing himself reflected there, he drew them back to the grass. So great was the shame that weighed upon his face. The sternness in the lady's voice was that of a mother reproaching a beloved child whose waywardness has caused her pain. Her words cut deeper than any physical punishment could have done, for they revealed not anger, but disappointment, the sorrow of one who had watched from paradise as her beloved strayed from the path that led to true happiness. Weep now," the celestial guide continued, "for you shall weep for another sword yet. Look at me. I am indeed your teacher. How did you deign to come to the mountain? Did you not know that here man is happy?" The repetition emphasized both her identity and the magnitude of his failure to live up to the promise she had seen in the author. The angels who accompanied the procession began to sing "In te, Domine, speravi." "In you, Lord, I have hoped." But they stopped before the verse, "You have not put my feet in chains," suggesting that the wanderer's feet were indeed bound by the consequences of his choices, though not beyond the possibility of liberation through grace. The reproach continued as the Blessed Lady revealed how she had watched over the Florentine even after her death, sending dreams and inspirations to guide the writer toward virtue. "So low did he fall," she said, speaking of the author in the third person as if he were not present, "that all means for his salvation were short, except showing the lost people. For this I visited the portal of the dead, and to whoever has conducted the wanderer up here, my prayers were carried with weeping." The revelation that this celestial guide herself had initiated the journey by appearing to Virgil in limbo added new depth to the entire adventure. What had seemed like chance encounter or personal initiative was revealed to be part of a plan motivated by infinite love and concern for a soul that had lost its way, despite its potential for greatness. The high decree of God would be broken, the lady explained, if Lethe were crossed and such food were tasted without some payment of repentance that sheds tears. These words made clear that the journey through hell and up the mountain had been necessary preparation for this moment of recognition and cleansing. Not merely punishment, but medicine for a spirit that had become diseased through its own choices. The procession continued with 7 ladies following the chariot, representing the 3 theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, and the 4 cardinal virtues, prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. These were the guides who would now take over the visitor's education, leading toward understanding that went beyond what human reason could achieve. Faith walked clothed in white, her eyes shining with wisdom that came from direct vision of truth, rather than logical deduction. Hope was dressed in green, the color of growth and anticipation, her gaze fixed on the future fulfillment of all promises. Charity burned in red robes, her face reflecting the flame of divine love that motivates all true virtue. The 4 cardinal virtues moved in purple garments, led by Prudence, who had 3 eyes, one to see the past, one for the present, and one to perceive the future. Their presence indicated that the garden represented not only the original state of innocence, but also the goal toward which all human virtue strives when properly directed. Following these came 2 old men, representing the later books of the New Testament. First Luke, carrying the symbols of his calling as physician, then Paul, with his sword symbolizing the sharpness of his teaching. 4 men of humble appearance represented the Catholic epistles, while at the end walked a solitary figure in sleep, his face sharp with insight. This was John the Evangelist, author of Revelation, whose vision of the end times completed the canon of Scripture. The entire procession moved with perfect harmony, each element in its proper place, demonstrating the order that governs all creation when it remains aligned with divine purpose. The music that accompanied them was unlike any earthly song, combining voices and instruments in harmonies that spoke directly to the soul, without need for interpretation. As the procession halted, the veiled lady descended from the chariot and approached the stream, where Matilda waited to assist in the traveller's purification. The moment had arrived for the crossing that would transform memory and consciousness, washing away the accumulated stains of error while preserving all that was truly valuable from the journey just completed. Draw me after you," the celestial guide commanded, and Matilda took the author's hand, leading the wanderer into the waters of Lethe. The stream that had seemed impassable proved to offer no resistance to those who approached it with proper preparation and guidance. As the waters closed over his head, the writer felt all memory of sin dissolving, leaving consciousness cleansed but not emptied. When the Florentine emerged from Lethe, 4 beautiful women surrounded the traveller, the cardinal virtues who had walked beside the chariot. "Here we are nymphs," they sang, "and in heaven we are stars. Before our mistress descended to the world, we were ordained to be her handmaids. We will lead you to her eyes, but the 3 on the other side, who look more deeply, will sharpen yours for the joyful light that is within them." This reference to the lady's eyes revealed their significance as windows into divine truth itself. The theological virtues, who look more deeply, would prepare the visitor's vision for mysteries that transcended what natural reason could perceive, while the cardinal virtues would ensure that understanding remained grounded in practical wisdom. As they led the author toward the blessed guide, she removed her veil, revealing a beauty that surpassed anything the writer had imagined during her earthly life. The sight was so overwhelming that consciousness fled, and when awareness returned, the Florentine found himself in Matilda's arms, being drawn across the second river, Uno, whose waters restored memory of all good deeds. "Remember you," a voice called as the traveler emerged from the second stream. And immediately his mind was filled with recollection of every moment when he had chosen virtue over vice, every time he had responded to grace rather than temptation. The restoration was not merely intellectual, but emotional. The author felt again the joy that had accompanied right choices, the peace that followed acts of mercy, the satisfaction of work done well and love freely given. The garden around them began to transform as symbolic visions unfolded, representing the history of the church and its relationship to temporal power. The griffin that had drawn the chariot bound the chariot's pole to a tree that immediately burst into bloom, suggesting the renewal that comes when divine and human nature are properly united. Yet the visions also revealed corruption and conflict. An eagle descended from heaven and tore away part of the chariot, representing the damage done to the church by imperial interference. A fox leapt into the chariot, but was driven away by the veiled lady, symbolizing the heresies that threaten true doctrine. Most dramatically, a dragon emerged from beneath the chariot and dragged away part of its foundation, showing how false teaching could undermine the church from within. Finally, the chariot was transformed into a seven-headed monster ridden by a shameless woman who kissed a giant standing beside her. When the woman's eyes wandered to the author, the giant beat her and dragged both her and the chariot away into the forest. This apocalyptic vision represented the corruption of the church through its alliance with temporal power and its abandonment of spiritual mission. Through all these transformations, the celestial guide remained unchanged, her beauty a constant reminder that divine truth endures despite human failure. Her presence assured the visitor that corruption, no matter how extensive, could never ultimately triumph over the goodness that underlies all creation. "You shall be with me without end, a citizen of that Rome of which Christ is Roman," the Blessed Lady promised, indicating that the earthly city had been only preparation for the heavenly citizenship that awaited all who completed the journey from sin through purification to perfect illumination. As the visions concluded, the guide turned to address the Florentine directly for the final time in the earthly paradise. "Brother, you who have come so far to see, take care that you do not close your mouth when you return, but tell also what you have seen here." Her commission was clear. The journey had been undertaken not for personal benefit alone, but to bring back knowledge that could help others find their own path to salvation. The earthly paradise represented both the goal of human purification and the starting point for the final ascent to paradise proper. Here the author had been cleansed of all memory of sin, while retaining the wisdom gained through experience. The traveler had been reunited with his celestial guide, the embodiment of revealed truth, and had witnessed visions that connected personal transformation to cosmic history. Most importantly, the visitor had learned that divine love operates not through arbitrary grace, but through a justice so perfect that it appears as mercy to those who accept its operation. The garden showed that humanity's original harmony with creation could be restored, not through return to innocence, but through the hard-won wisdom that comes from choosing good after experiencing evil. As they prepared to leave the earthly paradise for the spheres of heaven, the Florentine understood that his journey was far from complete. The purification achieved on the mountain had prepared the writer for experiences that would test the very limits of human comprehension. Yet with his blessed guide leading the way, and the memory of divine love as motivation, the author was ready to attempt the final ascent to the source of all light and love itself. From the earthly paradise, the ascent to the heavenly realm began not with physical movement, but with transformation of vision itself. As the Florentine gazed upon his guide's face, turned upward toward the sun, he felt his entire being changed in a way that defied description. Like Glaucus, who was transformed into a god by tasting the herb that made him one with the sea, the writer experienced a metamorphosis that lifted his consciousness beyond all mortal limitations. The glory of him who moves all things penetrates the universe and reglows in one part more and in another less. The poet began, attempting to convey experiences that strained the very capacity of human language. In the heaven that receives most of his light I have been, and I have seen things that he who descends from up there neither knows how nor has the power to recount, because approaching its object of desire, our intellect enters so deep that memory cannot follow. The first celestial realm they entered was that of the moon, where dwelt the spirits who had taken religious vows, but had been prevented from fulfilling them completely through no fault of their own. Here the holy beings appeared as faint impressions in pearl-like substance, so subtle that the visitor at first mistook them for reflections. When he turned to see what cast such images, he found nothing behind, and realized that these were the spirits themselves, appearing in forms adapted to his still limited understanding. Among these blessed figures was Piccarda Donati, sister to the pilgrim's friend Foresi, who had been forced from her convent by political necessity. Her face shone with gentle joy as she explained the nature of their contentment. Brother, the power of love quiets our will and makes us want only what we have, and gives us no thirst for anything else. If we desired to be higher, our desires would be discord with the will of him who assigns us here. Piccarda's words revealed one of the fundamental truths of paradise, that perfect happiness consists not in having everything one might wish, but in willing only what divine wisdom provides. In his will is our peace, she declared, and it is that sea to which all things move, both what it creates and what nature makes. This lesson in perfect contentment would be reinforced throughout the heavenly journey. Also present in the moon was Constance, mother of Emperor Frederick II, who had likewise been compelled to leave religious life for political marriage. Yet both women radiated perfect joy, having learned that love transforms even apparent limitations into sources of blessing. Their examples showed that holiness could flourish, even when external circumstances prevented the full expression of religious commitment. Ascending to the domain of Mercury, they encountered spirits who had sought honor and fame in their earthly lives, but had done so through virtuous actions, motivated by desire for good reputation rather than pure devotion to virtue. Here dwelt the great Emperor Justinian, who had codified Roman law, and whose reign had seen the reconquest of much of the old Roman Empire. Justinian's discourse provided a sweeping survey of Roman history, tracing the divine purpose that had guided the imperial eagle from Troy, through the founding of Rome to the establishment of Christian empire. When the tooth of Lombardy bit the Holy Church, he declared, referring to the conflicts between imperial and papal power, Charlemagne conquered and helped her with his wings under the shadow of the holy feathers. The emperor's presence in this region revealed that even those who had acted from mixed motives, seeking both heavenly approval and human praise, could achieve salvation when their actions served the common good. Yet their position in the lowest heavenly realms showed that purity of intention mattered as much as the goodness of deeds themselves. The realm of Venus contained those who had been overcome by passion in their earthly lives, but had learned to redirect their romantic natures toward divine objects. Here the visitor encountered Charles Martel, King of Hungary, whose early death had prevented him from achieving his full potential as a ruler. Their conversation addressed the relationship between heredity and individual character, explaining how providence ensures that each spirit receives the gifts needed for its particular mission. Nature is always deficient if fortune does not move along with it, Charles explained. And so it happens that a people under guidance goes astray, and one is born to gird on the sword, and another to be devoted to sermons, and another to rule, to whom nature gave skills for that. This insight into heavenly economy showed how apparent accidents of birth and circumstance actually serve larger purposes in the cosmic order. The fourth region, that of the sun, blazed with the glory of theologians and wise teachers who had illuminated the world with their learning. Here, Thomas Aquinas led a circle of 12 holy spirits representing the highest achievements of Christian wisdom. With characteristic humility, Thomas identified his companions while emphasizing the unity that transcended their earthly disagreements. "I was a lamb of the holy flock that Dominic leads on the path where they fatten well if they do not stray," Thomas declared, then proceeded to praise Francis of Assisi, founder of the rival mendicant order. This generous recognition of a supposed competitor revealed how perfect love overcomes all earthly divisions and rivalries. The discourse that followed provided the most beautiful account of Francis's life ever written, presenting him as a second Christ whose marriage to Lady Poverty renewed the Church's commitment to apostolic simplicity. Between Tupino and the water that descends from the hill chosen by blessed Ubaldo, a fertile slope hangs from a high mountain, from which Perugia feels cold and heat through Porta Sole, and behind it Nocera and Gualdo weep for their heavy yoke. From this slope, where it most breaks its steepness, a sun rose upon the world, as this one sometimes does from the Ganges. Thomas's praise of Francis was matched by Bonaventure's eulogy of Dominic in a second circle of 12 spirits. The Franciscan theologian described the Spanish founder as a mighty torrent that swept away heretical weeds while nourishing the garden of Catholic faith. This reciprocal praise between representatives of competing religious orders demonstrated the perfect unity that characterizes the redeemed. Yet both teachers also delivered sharp criticisms of their respective orders' contemporary failures. Thomas condemned Franciscans who had abandoned their founder's commitment to poverty, while Bonaventure criticized Dominicans who had been corrupted by worldly learning. These reproaches showed that even the redeemed retained concern for the church militant and its need for constant reform. The domain of Mars contained the warriors of faith, those who had fought and died defending Christianity against its enemies. They appeared arranged in the form of a great cross blazing with light, while voices sang hymns of victory that filled the entire heaven with music. From this cross stepped forth the spirit of Cacciaguida, the visitor's own great-great-grandfather, who had died fighting in the Second Crusade. Cacciaguida's greeting was delivered in archaic Latin that emphasized the ancient nobility of their lineage. O sanguis meus, o superinfusa gratia Dei, O my blood, O grace of God poured out abundantly. The ancestor proceeded to describe the Florence of his youth, when the city was still contained within its ancient walls, and its citizens maintained the simple virtues that had made them strong. Florence, within her ancient circle of walls from which she still hears terce and nones, lived in peace, sober and chaste, Cacciaguida recalled. There was no chain, no crown, no embroidered gowns, no girdle that was more worth seeing than the person wearing it. This nostalgic portrait served as implicit criticism of contemporary Florentine luxury and corruption. Most significantly, Cacciaguida delivered the prophecy of the poet's exile that had been hinted at throughout the journey. "You shall leave everything you cherish most dearly," the ancestor declared, "and this is the arrow that the bow of exile shoots first. You shall come to know how salt is the taste of another man's bread, and how hard is the path up and down another man's stairs." Yet this prophecy of suffering was accompanied by assurance of ultimate vindication. Your first refuge and first lodging will be the courtesy of the great Lombard who bears the holy bird upon the ladder, Cacciaguida revealed, referring to Can Grande della Scala of Verona, who would become the writer's patron. The exile that seemed like punishment would become the means of achieving a fame that transcended local politics. The region of Jupiter contained the spirits of just rulers, those who had governed with wisdom and righteousness. They appeared first as individual lights that gradually formed themselves into letters spelling out the Latin phrase "Diligite justitiam qui judicatis terram." Love justice, you who judge the earth. The final letter, M, then transformed into the shape of an eagle, symbol of imperial justice. This eagle, formed from countless beings speaking with a single voice, represented the ideal of earthly authority exercised in accordance with divine will. Its discourse addressed the problem of heavenly justice and the salvation of righteous pagans, questions that had troubled the Florentine throughout his journey. "Now he knows much that the world cannot see of divine grace," the eagle declared, speaking of a righteous pagan ruler, "although his sight cannot discern the bottom. Therefore he acts righteously, and that righteous love opens up his understanding little by little to that eternal justice." This revelation showed how divine mercy could extend even to those who had never heard the gospel, provided they lived according to the natural law written in their hearts. The domain of Saturn appeared as pure crystalline light, without the warm coloring that had characterized the lower heavens. Here dwelt the contemplatives, monks and hermits, who had devoted their lives entirely to prayer and meditation. They appeared climbing up and down a golden ladder that stretched beyond sight, representing Jacob's ladder from his vision at Bethel. Among these holy beings was Peter Damian, the great reformer, who had fought corruption in the medieval church. His discourse condemned the luxury and worldliness of contemporary prelates. "They go now with cloaks to cover their palfreys, so that two beasts go under one hide. O patience that endures so much." The reformer's indignation at clerical corruption burned so brightly that his very words seemed to shake the heavens. Also present was Benedict, founder of Western monasticism, whose rule had shaped religious life for centuries. The patriarch described his original vision of monks as soldiers of Christ who conquered spiritual territories through prayer and penance. Yet he too lamented the decline of monastic observance. "The walls that used to be an abbey have become dens, and the cowls are sacks full of rotten flour." The ascent from Saturn to the region of the fixed stars was marked by another transformation in the pilgrim's vision. Looking back at the path they had traveled, he could see all 7 planetary regions spread out below, including the Earth itself appearing as a small, dark globe. "I saw this globe in such a way that I smiled at its paltry appearance," the writer observed, "and I approve that counsel as best which holds it of least account." In the constellation of Gemini, under which the poet had been born, he encountered the figures who had triumphed through faith, hope, and love. Here the apostles Peter, James, and John examined the pilgrim on these three theological virtues that form the foundation of all Christian life. The examinations were conducted with the kindness of teachers helping a beloved student, yet their seriousness reflected the fundamental importance of these virtues. Peter's examination on faith began with the question of its essential nature. "Tell me, what is faith?" the first apostle asked. The visitor responded with the definition from Hebrews. "Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen." Peter's follow-up questions explored the sources of faith and the reasons for believing, culminating in approval of the pilgrim's understanding. James then examined hope, that virtue which sustains beings through earthly trials, while focusing their desires on eternal rewards. "Tell me what hope is," the apostle commanded, and received the response that hope is a certain expectation of future glory, which is produced by divine grace and preceding merit. The examination revealed how hope operates as the link between faith's knowledge and love's action. Finally, John tested the traveler's understanding of love, the greatest of the virtues that both motivates and perfects all others. "Tell me toward what your mind is directed," the beloved disciple requested, leading to a comprehensive discussion of affection's proper objects and the hierarchy of attachment that should govern Christian life. These examinations served not merely as tests, but as instruction, deepening the Florentine's understanding of virtues he had already practiced. Each apostle's approval marked another stage in the preparation for the final vision that awaited in the highest heaven. The progression from faith through hope to love mirrored the Spirit's journey from initial belief through sustained effort to perfect union with divine affection. As they prepared to ascend from the stellar region to the primum mobile, the visitor witnessed one final transformation. His guide's beauty had been increasing throughout their journey, but now it reached such intensity that description became impossible. "If I were to smile," she warned, "you would become like Semele when she was turned to ashes, because my beauty, which blazes more brightly as we climb the steps of the eternal palace, as you have seen, would shine so brightly that your mortal power could not endure it." This warning prepared the pilgrim for entry into the ninth and highest material domain, the primum mobile, or first moved, which imparts motion to all the lower heavens, while itself being moved only by divine love. Here space and time reach their limits, for beyond this realm lies the Empyrean, pure light and love that transcends all physical categories. At the boundary between time and eternity, the poet saw reflected in his guide's eyes the vision that would prepare him for the final ascent. 9 circles of pure light revolved around a single point of infinite brightness, their speed corresponding to their proximity to the center. These were the 9 orders of angels: seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominions, virtues, powers, principalities, archangels, and angels, who govern the cosmic order through their contemplation of divine truth. From that point hangs the heaven and all nature, his guide explained. "Look at that circle, which is most conjoined to it, and know that its movement is so swift because of the burning love by which it is spurred." This vision revealed the true structure of reality, not the material regions that had seemed so important during the ascent, but the spiritual hierarchies that actually govern all existence through their participation in divine love. The journey through the 9 heavenly realms had shown the writer how divine justice operates through apparently material causes, while actually being motivated entirely by love. Each heaven had revealed different aspects of blessedness, while maintaining the fundamental truth that all salvation comes from grace freely given rather than merits earned. The redeemed spirits had appeared in the regions that corresponded to their earthly inclinations, not because they were limited to those locations, but because heavenly pedagogy accommodated their instruction to human ways of understanding. As they prepared for the final ascent beyond space and time itself, the poet understood that everything witnessed so far had been preparation for mysteries that would challenge the very foundations of human comprehension. Yet the journey through the heavenly domains had strengthened his capacity for vision, while demonstrating that divine love underlies even the most complex manifestations of justice and wisdom. The 9 heavenly realms had been a school of paradise, where graduated lessons in blessedness prepared spirits for the perfect happiness that awaited in the presence of the Trinity itself. Each encounter had revealed new depths of divine mercy while maintaining the inexorable demands of perfect justice. Now the Florentine was ready to attempt the final ascent to the source of all light, love and being, the vision of God himself in the Empyrean, that heaven which is pure light, intellectual, full of love, love of true good, full of joy, joy that transcends every sweetness. Beyond the 9th heaven lay the Empyrean, that realm which existed not as place, but as pure radiance intellectual, full of charity, charity of true good, full of joy, joy that transcended all sweetness. Here the physical universe reached its boundary, and pure spirit began its reign. As the 2 travelers crossed this final threshold, the Florentine felt his perception transformed once more, but now in a manner so complete that all previous changes seemed merely preparatory. The brilliance that surrounded them bore no resemblance to any illumination from the lower realms. This radiance did not shine upon objects, but revealed the essence of truth, penetrating beyond all surfaces to illuminate the foundations of existence. Each shadow that had clouded understanding dissolved in this splendor that was both infinitely gentle and overwhelmingly powerful. As they emerged into this ultimate heaven, the writer's beloved guide spoke words that carried the weight of final revelation. We have issued forth from the greatest body into the heaven that is pure radiance, radiance intellectual full of charity, charity of true good, full of joy, joy that surpasses all sweetness. Here you will see both hosts of paradise, and one in those aspects which you will behold at the final judgment. Yet as she delivered this promise, another presence approached through the blazing atmosphere, an ancient figure whose countenance radiated such profound affection that he seemed a father gazing upon his most cherished child. This was Bernard of Clairvaux, that great mystic whose earthly life had been consumed in contemplation of the mysteries now being revealed. His face bore the serenity of one who had already glimpsed what the Florentine now prepared to witness. "O you who have come so far to see," the holy man addressed the living visitor with infinite tenderness, "look now upon that face which most resembles Christ, for only its brightness can prepare you to see Christ." With these words, he directed the author's gaze toward a brilliance of incomparable beauty. An understanding dawned that this was Mary, she through whom salvation had been made possible for all humanity. The Blessed Lady, who had guided the writer through all the celestial spheres, now departed from his side to take her place among the redeemed, in what revealed itself as an enormous rose of pure radiance. All souls of the saved formed the petals of this celestial flower, their individual splendor contributing to a harmony so complete that it seemed one eternal song of praise. She who had been teacher, guide, and beloved companion became part of this sight, her mission completed, her promise fulfilled. "Behold the great assembly of the white-robed multitude," Bernard continued, his voice carrying wonder despite his familiarity with these mysteries. "See how vast is our city. Look upon our benches, so filled that few souls are now awaited there." The contemplative saint revealed the structure of this final paradise, the celestial rose, where all beings who had achieved salvation dwelt in absolute blessedness. their positions determined by celestial justice yet overflowing with infinite mercy. In the highest tier of this magnificent amphitheatre sat those who had believed in Christ to come, led by Mary, radiant beyond all description. Below them were arranged the souls of those who had looked to Christ already come, their faces bright with the fulfillment of ancient hopes. Children who had died in innocence occupied their own blessed section, saved not through their own merits, but by grace alone. The patriarchs of old and the apostles of the new covenant held places of special honor, while countless other figures, some renowned in history, others known only to celestial affection, completed this assembly that surpassed all earthly gatherings in both magnitude and glory. As the author contemplated this sight of absolute order, unified by profound affection, Bernard began the prayer that would make possible the ultimate revelation. The saint's words rose through the luminous air as the sweetest incense, carrying with them the accumulated longing of the entire journey. Virgin Mother, daughter of your own Son, more humble and more exalted than any creature, fixed goal of the eternal council. You are she who so ennobled mortal nature that its creator did not disdain to become his own creation. Within your womb was rekindled the charity whose warmth has caused this flower to bloom in the eternal peace. The prayer continued with mounting intensity, each phrase a jewel of theological beauty. Here you are for us, the noonday torch of charity, and below, among mortals, you are the living fountain of hope. Lady, you are so great and possess such power that whoever seeks grace without recourse to you would have his desire attempt to fly without wings. Bernard's supplication reached its climactic appeal. Now this man, who from the lowest pit of the universe up to here has seen the spiritual lives one by one, begs you for the grace of such power that he may be able to lift his eyes still higher toward the ultimate salvation. And I, who never burned for my own sight more than I do for his, offer you all my prayers, and pray they may not be insufficient, that you may scatter each cloud of his mortality with your intercessions, so that the supreme joy may be revealed to him. As the prayer concluded, Mary turned her eyes toward the highest radiance with such reverence and adoration that the Florentine felt his own perception drawn irresistibly upward toward mysteries that lay beyond this assembly of the blessed. The moment had arrived for which the entire pilgrimage had been preparation, the direct sight of God in his essential nature. The transformation began gradually, as dawn slowly revealing a landscape that had been hidden in darkness. The pilgrim's consciousness expanded beyond all previous boundaries, as his enhanced perception penetrated deeper into the celestial radiance that was the source and sustenance of all existence. What he beheld there challenged the capacity of mortal memory and expression. Within the ineffable splendor appeared 3 circles of brilliance, each of the same dimension, yet distinct in color and essence. The first circle reflected itself completely in the second, as a rainbow born from another rainbow, while from both proceeded a third that seemed as fire breathing forth equally from each of its sources. Here was the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, revealed not as theological doctrine, but as living reality, the foundation upon which all existence rested. O eternal radiance, who alone dwell in yourself, alone understand yourself, and understood and understanding, cherish and smile upon yourself. The writer's soul cried out in recognition, though no mortal language could adequately capture the magnitude of what he witnessed. This was the answer to all questions that had driven his search for meaning, the fulfillment of each desire that had led him through the dark wood of error. Yet the sight deepened still further as an even greater mystery revealed itself within the celestial splendor. In the second circle of brilliance, The pilgrim perceived what appeared to be a mortal face, the profound mystery of the Incarnation, that impossible union of heavenly and earthly nature in the person of Christ. How could the infinite become finite while remaining infinite? How could the eternal enter time without ceasing to be eternal? How could the Creator become creature while remaining fully God? These paradoxes that had challenged the greatest theological minds resolved themselves not through logical explanation, but through direct participation in their reality. As a geometer who concentrates all his powers on squaring the circle, but cannot discover the principle he seeks, the Florentine strained to comprehend how mortal nature could be contained within the celestial circle, how mortality could be assumed into immortality without either nature being destroyed or diminished. Then came the flash of illuminating grace that struck his mind as lightning penetrating the darkness. In that sublime instant, understanding arrived, not as intellectual comprehension, but as immediate sight of truth. The mystery filled his consciousness completely, revealing not merely the answer to his quest, but the recognition that his quest had been motivated and sustained by the very force he now beheld face to face. The experience overwhelmed his faculties of perception and memory. Here, my high imagination failed of power, he would later acknowledge, recognizing that no mortal language or recollection could retain the fullness of what had been granted to his sight. Yet in this apparent failure lay the greatest success, for his individual will ceased its ancient struggle against heavenly purpose. As a wheel that turns in complete harmony with the mechanism that drives it, his desires align themselves entirely with the force that governs all creation. The journey that had begun in the dark wood of spiritual confusion reached its completion in this absolute unity of mortal freedom with celestial will, where choice and destiny revealed themselves as one. The transformation was both overwhelming in its magnitude and peaceful in its resolution. Each question that had tormented his searching mind found its answer in the direct experience of absolute affection. All sin that had weighted his conscience dissolved in the presence of infinite mercy. Each fear that had driven him to seek meaning in external things vanished in the recognition that ultimate meaning dwelt within him as the gift of grace. His sight could not sustain such intensity indefinitely while his nature remained mortal, but what had been seen could never be unseen. What had been experienced could never be lost. He returned to ordinary consciousness, transformed beyond recognition, carrying within himself the memory of absolute affection and the certainty that all creation moved toward this same glorious destination. From the dark wood, where he had lost the straight path to this ultimate site of celestial affection, each step of the journey had been guided by the same force he now beheld in its essential nature. The descent through hell's terrible justice, the ascent up purgatory's merciful correction, the flight through heaven's illuminating wisdom, all had been movements within this single, all-encompassing force that was both the source and goal of existence. The pilgrim who had been lost was found at last. The soul that had wandered in confusion had come home to its true dwelling place. The heart that had sought satisfaction in finite things was filled with infinite joy, and the force that had called him from the beginning embraced him at the end, as it embraces all who allow themselves to be drawn into the eternal dance of absolute harmony. His desire and his will, as a wheel that moves with even motion, were now revolved by the power that moves the sun and the other stars. The comedy was complete, not because it avoided the tragic elements of mortal experience, but because it revealed how suffering and loss served the purposes of infinite wisdom, transforming each ending into a new beginning, each apparent defeat into ultimate victory, each temporal sorrow into eternal joy.